When standing up for your child means losing everything, would you stay silent? At 3:17 a.m., Daniel Harper stared at an email that could destroy his world. Urgent meeting with HR. 9 a.m. For years, this pediatric ICU nurse had walked a tightrope, saving children's lives while raising his daughter alone. One supervisor saw his dedication as weakness. 17 documented violations, one final warning. But when Daniel refused to apologize for being a father, he triggered a confrontation that would either end his career or transform an entire hospital. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed their familiar 3 a.m. lullaby, casting everything in that peculiar shade of antiseptic white that made time feel suspended. Daniel Harper sat at the nurse's station in the pediatric intensive care unit, his shoulders hunched over a computer screen, watching the cursor blink in the subject line of an email that had just shattered his carefully constructed equilibrium. Subject: Mandatory Meeting, HR Department, 9 a.m. sharp. His hands, steady enough to thread an IV into a premature infant's vein in near darkness, trembled as he clicked the message open. Mr. Harper, your presence is required in Human Resources at 9 a.m. today regarding recent performance concerns and documented policy violations. This meeting is mandatory and will include Rebecca Cole, your direct supervisor, and Jennifer Matthews from HR. Please arrive promptly. Administration. Daniel's stomach performed a slow, sickening roll. He knew exactly what this was about. Of course he did. For the past 3 months, ever since Rebecca Cole had transferred from the surgical wing to oversee the PICU, his world had been steadily constricting like a noose pulled tight 1 millimeter at a time. Around him, the PICU breathed its mechanical symphony, ventilators sighing in rhythm, monitors beeping their steady reassurances, the soft shuffle of nurses moving between rooms where children fought battles far too large for their small bodies. This place had been his sanctuary for 8 years, the one constant in a life that had been torn apart and painstakingly rebuilt. You okay, Danny? He looked up to find Maria Rodriguez, the night shift charge nurse, studying him with concern etched into the lines around her dark eyes. Maria had worked alongside him since his first nervous day in the PICU, had held him together when Sarah died, had brought casseroles and understanding during those impossible first months of solo parenthood. Yeah, he lied, closing the email. Just tired. But... Maria didn't buy it, she never did, but she respected his boundaries enough not to push. Room 412 needs vitals in 15. The Morrison baby's oxygen saturation has been fluctuating. On it, Daniel stood, grateful for the distraction, and pulled up the digital chart. Emma Morrison, 3 months old, born at 26 weeks. She'd spent her entire short life in this unit, fighting chronic lung disease with the fierce determination that always amazed him about premature babies. Her parents took turns at her bedside in 4-hour shifts, their eyes perpetually rimmed with exhaustion and terror. He gathered his equipment and headed down the corridor, his sneakers silent on the polished linoleum. The wall clock read 3:24 a.m. In 5.5 hours, he'd be sitting across from Rebecca Cole and HR, defending himself against charges that made his dedication to his daughter sound like professional negligence. 17 documented violations. The number had been emblazoned across the disciplinary warning Rebecca had delivered 2 weeks ago, her voice crisp and clinical as she'd recited his transgressions. Unauthorized use of personal mobile device during shift hours, distraction from patient care, failure to maintain professional focus, violation of hospital communication policies. Every single violation had been the same thing: checking his phone when Mia's school texted, a picture of her artwork, a reminder about picture day, a note that she'd scraped her knee at recess but was fine, the mundane, precious fragments of his daughter's life that he clung to during the 12-hour night shifts that kept them housed and fed. Mr. Harper? A tentative voice pulled him from his thoughts. Daniel looked up to find James Morrison standing in the doorway of his daughter's room, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 months. How is she tonight? James asked, the question he asked every single time Daniel checked on Emma, as if the answer might have changed in the hour since his last inquiry. wiry. "Let's take a look together," Daniel said gently, entering the room where Emma lay in her isolette, a tiny human barely larger than a loaf of bread, connected to machines by a web of tubes and wires. As Daniel checked her vitals, adjusting oxygen levels and recording readings, James watched with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "You have kids?" James asked suddenly. "A daughter, Mia. She's 7. This must be easier for you then, understanding what we're going through." Daniel paused, meeting the other man's eyes. "It doesn't make it easier. It makes it harder. Every baby here. I see Mia. I see what you're feeling, but that's what makes me better at this job, not worse." James nodded slowly. "The day shift nurses are good. But you treat Emma like she's yours. We notice that. Sarah and we request you specifically when you're on rotation." Something tightened in Daniel's chest. This was why he did this, why he'd chosen pediatrics despite the heartbreak that came with it, why he showed up every night even when exhaustion made his bones ache. Children like Emma deserve nurses who saw them as miracles, not just patients. "Emma's doing well tonight," Daniel assured him. "Her O2 sats are stable. Get some rest while you can." After completing his rounds, Daniel returned to the nurse's station to document his findings. The wall clock now read 4:47 a.m. His phone, tucked in his locker as per Rebecca's increasingly strict policies, would remain there until his shift ended at 7 a.m. Then he'd have 90 minutes to get home, wake Mia, make breakfast, get her ready for school, drop her off, and somehow transform himself into someone composed enough to face HR. "Coffee?" Maria appeared at his elbow with 2 steaming cups from the break room. She set one beside him and leaned against the counter. "Spill it, Danny. You've got that look." "What look?" "The look you had when Sarah was sick. When you're carrying something heavy and trying to pretend it weighs nothing." Daniel wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, letting the heat ground him. "HR meeting at 9. Rebecca's complaints." Maria's expression darkened. "The phone thing?" "The phone thing. That's ridiculous. You check your phone for 30 seconds once or twice a shift. You think the doctors aren't on their phones? You think admin isn't scrolling Twitter between meetings?" "It's different when it's about my kid, apparently. Makes me look distracted, unprofessional." Daniel took a bitter sip of coffee. "She's documented 17 separate incidents." 17? Maria's voice rose, then immediately lowered when she remembered where they were. "Danny, you're the best nurse in this unit. Your patient satisfaction scores are perfect. You've never had a medication error, never missed a critical vital change. Parents request you by name. What the hell is her problem?" That was the question Daniel had been asking himself for 3 months. Rebecca Cole had arrived at St. Catherine's with an impressive resume and a reputation for turning underperforming units into models of efficiency. She was 42, unmarried, childless, and seemed to view any acknowledgement of life outside the hospital as a character flaw. Their first interaction had set the tone for everything that followed. It had been a Wednesday evening just after shift change. Daniel's phone had buzzed in his pocket, Mia's school calling because she'd thrown up during lunch and needed to be picked up immediately. He'd answered it right there at the nurse's station, in front of Rebecca, who was making her inaugural rounds. "Oakwood Elementary? This is Mia's dad." "Yes." "Okay, I'll be there as soon as I can arrange coverage." He'd hung up to find Rebecca watching him with an expression of cold disapproval. "Personal calls during work hours, mister. Harper?" "My daughter's school. She's sick. I need to arrange coverage for the rest of my shift." "I see." Rebecca had made a note on her tablet. For future reference, personal calls should be handled during designated breaks. If you have childcare issues that interfere with your reliability, you should consider whether this schedule is sustainable for you. The words had been delivered with such clinical detachment that it had taken Daniel a moment to process the implication that being a single parent made him a liability. That had been strike 1. The strikes had accumulated steadily after that, each one documented with the precision of someone building a case. Strike 2. Checking his phone when Mia's after-school program texted that she'd left her lunchbox. Strike 3. Checking his phone when his neighbor texted that Mia had arrived safely at her house after school. Strike 4 through 17. Every subsequent time he dared to verify that his daughter, his world, his reason for breathing was safe and cared for during the 12 hours he spent away from her every night. The confrontation had come 2 weeks ago. Rebecca had called him into her office at the end of his shift, her expression carved from ice. "Mr. Harper, we need to discuss your performance." She'd slid a folder across her desk. Inside were printouts of every incident she'd documented, time-stamped and cross-referenced with patient care logs, to create the narrative that his distraction was compromising care. 17 violations of hospital policy regarding personal device usage during patient care hours, Rebecca had stated. This is unacceptable. Daniel had felt something crack inside him then, some careful politeness that he'd maintained in the face of her relentless criticism. These violations are me making sure my 7-year-old daughter is safe while I'm working nights, 30-second checks, always during natural lulls in patient care. The policy is clear. Personal devices are to be used only during designated breaks. Your inability to adhere to this suggests either a lack of professionalism or an unsuitable work-life balance. My work-life balance, Daniel had said quietly, is none of your concern as long as my patient care is exemplary. Which it is. Rebecca's jaw had tightened. Your patient care is adequate. Your professionalism is questionable. Consider this your final warning, Mr. Harper. One more violation and I'll have no choice but to recommend termination. She'd leaned forward then, her voice dropping. I understand you're a single parent. That's unfortunate. But this hospital cannot make exceptions for everyone's personal circumstances. If you cannot maintain appropriate boundaries between your personal and professional life, perhaps you should seek employment with more flexible expectations. Daniel had walked out of that office knowing he was being set up to fail. Rebecca wanted him gone, whether because she genuinely believed he was inadequate or because his very existence as a devoted father challenged her worldview, he couldn't say. But the intent was clear. For 2 weeks, he'd been scrupulous about keeping his phone in his locker. For 2 weeks, he'd worked his shifts with a knot of anxiety in his stomach, wondering if Mia was okay, if she needed him, if something had gone wrong and he was unreachable. Then 5 days ago, his phone had buzzed in his pocket during a shift. He'd been in the middle of adjusting an IV pump, and the vibration had been unexpected because he'd thought it was in his locker. He'd pulled it out automatically, muscle memory from years of being on call for Mia's needs. It was a text from Oakwood Elementary. Mia had a minor incident on the playground. Small cut on her forehead, no stitches needed. She's fine, but asking for you. He'd read it in 5 seconds, typed back, "Thank you for letting me know. Please tell her I love her," and pocketed the phone. Rebecca had materialized at his elbow as if summoned by the transgression itself. "Phone, Mr. Harper?" "Mia's school. She got hurt on the playground." "Is it an emergency requiring you to leave?" "No, she's—" "Then you've just violated your final warning." Rebecca's smile had been sharp enough to draw blood. "HR will be in touch." Now here he was, watching the clock tick toward a meeting that would likely end with him jobless. The injustice of it burned in his chest. 8 years of impeccable service, countless lives touched, families comforted, crises managed, all about to be erased because he dared to be a father while being a nurse. "Danny," Maria's voice cut through his spiral. "You need to fight this." "Fight what?" "She has documentation. Policy is policy." Policy is supposed to serve patient care, not destroy good nurses. You know what your real violation is? You make her look bad. You do this job with heart, and it highlights that she does it like a robot. Parents love you. Your colleagues love you. That's what she can't stand. Daniel wanted to believe her, but belief felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. "I can't lose this job, Maria. It's everything. The health insurance alone, Mia's asthma medication costs $400 a month without coverage. And the mortgage, the car payment, school supplies, food." His voice trailed off into the mathematics of survival that governed every decision he made. Then walk in there at 9 and remind them who you are, not who Rebecca says you are. At 6:45 a.m., Daniel handed off his patients to the day shift, providing detailed reports on every child in his care. Emma Morrison was stable. The 8-year-old in 407 recovering from appendectomy had slept through the night. The teenager in 403 with diabetic ketoacidosis had maintained good blood sugar levels. He changed out of his scrubs in the locker room, pulling on jeans and a button-down shirt. His reflection in the mirror showed a 34-year-old man who looked 40, dark circles under hazel eyes, brown hair overdue for a cut, a jaw tight with tension. The drive home took 20 minutes through streets just beginning to wake up. His neighborhood was modest, small houses with chain-link fences, cars that ran but weren't pretty, the geography of people who worked hard and worried about money. He'd bought this house with Sarah when they were newlyweds and optimistic, when they'd planned for multiple children and growing old together, and all those dreams that evaporated when cancer came calling. Inside, the house was quiet. He climbed the stairs to Mia's room and found her curled under her unicorn comforter, dark hair splayed across her pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant she'd had since birth. "Mia Bean," he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Time to wake up." She stirred, eyes blinking open. Sarah's eyes, that same shade of amber green that made his heart clench every time he saw them. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, all sleepy warmth and unconditional love, and Daniel held her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. This was why every battle was worth fighting. "How was work?" she asked, pulling back to study his face with that unsettling perceptiveness 7-year-olds sometimes possessed. "Good. Helped some kids feel better. How was your evening with Mrs. Chen?" "We made pot stickers. She taught me how to fold them. And we watched a movie about pandas." Mia's expression shifted, became more serious. "Daddy, my forehead doesn't hurt anymore." From the playground. "You don't have to worry." The text message. Of course she knew he'd gotten it. "I always worry about you, Bean. That's my job as your dad. Mrs. Chen says you work too hard. She says you need to sleep more." "Mrs. Chen is very wise." He tapped her nose. "But right now you need to get ready for school. Breakfast in 15 minutes. While Mia got dressed, Daniel made scrambled eggs and toast, packed her lunch, turkey sandwich, apple slices, the granola bar she liked, water bottle, and tried not to check the clock obsessively. The HR meeting loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon. At 8:15, he dropped Mia off at Oakwood Elementary, watching her run toward her best friend Sophia with that boundless energy unique to second graders. She turned at the door to wave, her gap-toothed smile bright enough to crack his heart wide open. "I love you, Mia Bean," he called. "Love you, Daddy?" Then she was gone, disappearing into the school, into her world of spelling tests and recess and playground politics, trusting absolutely that he would be there when that world ended at 3:30 p.m. Daniel sat in his car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. He could not lose his job. Failure was not an option. But as he drove toward St. Catherine's for a meeting that felt more like a tribunal, he found himself wondering, at what point did being a good father make him a bad employee? And why did he have to choose between the two? The Human Resources Department occupied the second floor of St. Catherine's administrative building, a separate structure from the hospital proper. Daniel arrived at 8:52, signed in at reception, and took a seat in the waiting area where the chairs were too firm and the magazines too old. At precisely 9 o'clock, a woman emerged from an office down the hall. Jennifer Matthews, HR director, mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain and an expression of professional neutrality. "Mr. Harper, please come in." The office was sterile in that particularly corporate way. Motivational posters about teamwork, a fake plant in the corner, a desk that had never seen actual clutter. Rebecca Cole was already seated, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She wore her typical uniform of pressed slacks and a cardigan, her graying hair cut in a severe bob that matched her personality. Daniel took the remaining chair across from Jennifer's desk and folded his hands in his lap to keep them from shaking. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harper," Jennifer began, opening a folder that Daniel recognized with a sinking feeling, Rebecca's documentation. "We're here to discuss some ongoing performance concerns raised by your supervisor." "I understand." His voice came out steady, which felt like a small victory. Jennifer glanced at Rebecca, who took her cue like an actor hitting their mark. "For the record," Rebecca began, her tone businesslike, "I want to state that this is not personal. My role is to ensure that our PICU maintains the highest standards of patient care and professional conduct. Mr. Harper has repeatedly violated hospital policy regarding personal device usage during work hours, despite multiple verbal warnings and one written final warning." She slid a packet across the desk to Jennifer, copies for everyone, apparently. Daniel's transgressions, neatly tabulated. These violations span a 3-month period, Rebecca continued. They demonstrate a pattern of distraction and an inability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. On 5 separate occasions, I personally observed Mr. Harper using his mobile device while on the floor during patient care hours. Each time, he claimed it was related to his daughter, as if that somehow exempts him from the rules that govern every other staff member. Jennifer studied the documents, her expression giving nothing away. Mr. Harper, do you dispute these observations? No, Daniel said quietly. I don't dispute that I checked my phone, but I dispute the characterization that it compromised patient care or represented any kind of professional failing. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. You admit to violating policy but claim it wasn't a violation? I claim that policy should serve the mission of this hospital, which is providing compassionate care. And compassion doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes from somewhere. For me, it comes from being a father. That's very touching, Rebecca said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. However, hospital policy is not negotiable based on individual circumstances. We have these rules for a reason, do we? Daniel met her gaze directly. Because I've been here 8 years, and until you arrived, no one had a problem with nurses briefly checking their phones during natural lulls in patient care. Doctors do it constantly. I've seen admin staff scrolling through social media in the cafeteria while technically on shift. But somehow, when a single father verifies that his child is safe, it becomes a terminable offense? Jennifer held up a hand. Let's stay focused on the specific issues at hand. Ms. Cole, you've documented 17 incidents. Walk us through the most recent one. Rebecca pulled out another sheet. Of course she had another sheet. 5 days ago, I observed Mr. Harper using his personal device while standing beside an IV pump in room 412. When I questioned him, he stated his daughter had been injured at school. However, when I asked if it was an emergency requiring him to leave his shift, he admitted it was not. This was a direct violation of the final warning he'd received 2 weeks prior. The text said Mia had cut her forehead on the playground, Daniel said, his voice tightening despite his efforts to stay calm. She's 7 years old. The school was letting me know she'd been hurt but was okay. I read the message, confirmed receipt, and returned to my patient care. Total time, maybe 30 seconds. 30 seconds during which your attention was not on your patient, Rebecca countered. My patient was Emma Morrison, 3 months old, stable vitals, sleeping peacefully. I had just completed an assessment and was making a routine adjustment to her IV pump rate. There was no emergency, no critical moment being interrupted. And yes, I took 30 seconds to make sure my daughter was okay, because that's what fathers do. That's what fathers do on their breaks, Rebecca shot back. During work hours, you're a nurse first. Something shifted in Daniel's chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity that came from finally seeing the shape of the trap he'd been caught in. No, he said quietly. I'm never just a nurse. I'm never just a father. I'm both, all the time. They're not separate compartments I can switch between. The reason I'm good at this job, and I am good at this job, is because being Mia's dad taught me what it means to care for someone completely, to see them as a whole person, not just a set of symptoms or a problem to solve. Jennifer made a note. Mr. Harper, your personnel file shows an exemplary record prior to Ms. Cole's arrival as supervisor. 8 years, no disciplinary actions. Multiple commendations from patients and families. Can you help me understand this sudden pattern of policy violations? There's no pattern, Daniel said. Such. There's a single supervisor who has decided that being a dedicated parent makes me unfit to be a nurse. Every one of these so-called violations is the same thing, me being a father while doing my job, and I won't apologize for that. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly, color rising in her cheeks. This is exactly the problem. You seem to believe that your personal circumstances entitle you to special treatment. I don't want special treatment. I want the same latitude that's extended to every other employee in this hospital. I want to not be punished for loving my daughter. Enough! Jennifer's voice cut through the rising tension. Let's take a step back. Ms. Cole, beyond the phone usage, do you have concerns about Mr. Harper's actual patient care? Rebecca hesitated, and in that hesitation, Daniel saw the weakness in her case. His patient care is adequate. Adequate? Jennifer's tone sharpened. I'm looking at his performance reviews. Prior to your supervision, Mr. Harper received consistently outstanding ratings. His patient satisfaction scores are among the highest in the department. He's never had a medication error, never missed a critical status change, never had a family complaint. That's more than adequate. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Rebecca insisted. Professionalism matters. Setting appropriate boundaries matters. If we make exceptions for him, where does it end? Do we let nurses take personal calls during code blues? Do we ignore policy whenever someone has a convenient excuse? A convenient excuse? The words came out sharper than Daniel intended. My wife died 4 years ago. Sarah was 31 years old when cancer took her. She spent her last weeks in a hospital bed, terrified about what would happen to Mia, terrified that our daughter would grow up without a mother, with only me to hold everything together. And I promised Sarah as she was dying, that I would be enough for Mia, that our daughter would never doubt she was loved, never feel abandoned, never have to wonder if her dad cared more about his job than her. His voice had risen, emotion bleeding through the careful control he'd maintained. So no, Ms. Cole, it's not convenient. It's not an excuse. It's a promise I made to my dying wife that I will keep until my last breath. And if that makes me a liability in your eyes, then maybe... The door burst open. All three of them turned to see Rebecca's assistant, a young woman named Kelly, her face flushed with urgency. Ms. Cole, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have an emergency call. It's about your mother. Every trace of color drained from Rebecca's face. My mother? She's fallen. The assisted living facility is on the line. They need to speak with you immediately. For a moment, Rebecca sat frozen, her professional mask completely shattered. Then she was moving, standing so quickly her chair rolled backward, reaching for Kelly's offered phone with trembling hands. This is Rebecca Cole. What happened? Is she conscious? Daniel watched as his supervisor transformed before his eyes. The crisp authority dissolved into raw fear. Her hand shook as she pressed the phone to her ear. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Yes, I understand. I'm leaving now. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her... Her voice cracked. Tell her I'm sorry I wasn't there. She ended the call and stood there, visibly struggling to regain composure, failing utterly. I have to go. My mother, she's 83. She fell getting out of bed. They're transporting her to St. Mary's. I have to... Go, Jennifer said immediately. Of course, we'll reschedule this meeting. But Rebecca seemed paralyzed, trapped between professional obligation and personal crisis, the same impossible choice she'd been punishing Daniel for navigating. Daniel stood. Ms. Cole, how far is St. Mary's? What? She blinked at him as if surfacing from deep water. St. Mary's. How far? 20 minutes, maybe 25 with traffic. Then you need to leave now. Don't worry about the unit. I'll cover your morning rounds. I know the patients, know the families. They'll be taken care of. Rebecca stared at him, incomprehension mixing with something that might have been shame. You would do that? After everything I've... Your mother needs you, Daniel said simply. Nothing else matters right now. Go. For a long moment, their eyes met. Then Rebecca grabbed her purse and fled, her footsteps echoing down the hallway in a desperate rhythm. The office fell silent. Jennifer Matthews sat back in her chair, studying Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. That was unexpected, she said finally. She's a daughter before she's a supervisor, Daniel said quietly. Just like I'm a father before I'm a nurse. We're all human first. Everything else comes after. Jennifer closed the folder of Rebecca's documentation without looking at it again. Mr. Harper, I'm going to be honest with you. This meeting was heading toward a suspension pending review, possibly termination. Ms. Cole had built what appeared to be a solid case based on policy violations. But policy is meant to support our mission, not undermine it. And our mission is compassionate care. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You just demonstrated more compassion for a supervisor who was actively trying to fire you than many people would show their closest friends. That tells me something about your character that no documentation can contradict. Daniel's pulse quickened with something that might have been hope. So I'm going to review this matter more thoroughly, examine the context of these violations, compare your record to other staff, Consult with other supervisors in the department. But I can tell you right now that what I saw today, your response to Ms. Cole's crisis, that's the kind of employee this hospital needs." She stood extending her hand. "Go home, Mr. Harper. Get some sleep. You've been up all night. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. Daniel shook her hand, barely able to process what had just happened. "Thank you." As he walked out of the administrative building into morning sunlight that felt startlingly bright, his phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "How'd it go?" He stood there on the sidewalk trying to formulate an answer to a question he couldn't quite answer himself. The meeting had been interrupted. Rebecca's carefully constructed case had crumbled in the face of her own family emergency. He'd offered help to someone who'd been trying to destroy him. And somehow, impossibly, he thought he might actually keep his job. Still processing, he texted back, "Tell you tonight." He drove home in a daze, his mind replaying Rebecca's expression when she'd looked at him after he offered to cover for her. That mixture of shock and shame and something else. Recognition, maybe. The sudden, unwelcome understanding that the man she'd been trying to fire was more capable of compassion than she'd been willing to see. At home, Daniel stood in the kitchen, too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones. He made coffee he didn't drink and stared at the refrigerator covered in Mia's artwork, crayon drawings of their family, stick figures labeled Daddy, Mia, and always a third figure in the sky labeled Mommy Angel. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Harper, this is Rebecca Cole." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. "Is your mother okay?" A pause. "They're admitting her for observation. Possible hip fracture, but she's stable, conscious. She knew who I was." "I'm glad." He meant it. "I'm calling because—" Another pause, longer this time. "Because I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you several. But this moment particularly, you had every reason to let me fail this morning, to let me scramble to cover my responsibilities while I dealt with my emergency. Instead, you helped me without hesitation. Why?" Daniel leaned against the counter, considering his answer carefully. "Because your mother needed you. And because I understand what it's like to be torn between work and family. That's not a weakness, Ms. Cole. It's what makes us human." He heard her breath catch on the other end of the line. She struggled with the words. "I've been punishing you for something I've been punishing myself for. My mother has been declining for 2 years. I moved her to assisted living 6 months ago, right before I transferred to the PICU. Every day I tell myself I should visit more, call more, be more present. But there's always work, always one more meeting, one more policy to implement, one more thing that seems urgent. And when you saw me checking on Mia, I saw someone who hadn't made the same mistake I was making. Someone who refused to let work consume them at the expense of family. And instead of recognizing that as strength, I tried to punish you for it. Because if you were wrong, then I was right. If caring about your daughter made you a bad employee, then I was justified in letting my career come first." Daniel closed his eyes. "We're all doing our best, Ms. Cole." "Are we?" Her voice was raw. "You are. You're working night shifts so you can be present for your daughter during the day. You're checking on her to make sure she's safe, not scrolling through social media or playing games. Every one of those 17 violations I documented, they were you being a good father while still being an excellent nurse. And I called it unprofessional." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm withdrawing my complaints. All of them. I'm recommending to HR that we revise our personal device policies to allow brief, necessary family communications during work hours. And I'm asking if you would consider working with me to develop those new policies, because clearly you understand the balance better than I do." Daniel's legs felt suddenly unsteady. He pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. "You're serious?" "Completely. Mr. Harper, Daniel, you showed me more grace in 5 minutes this morning than I've shown you in 3 months. You deserved better from your supervisor. And those children in our unit deserve to have you caring for them without the constant fear that loving your daughter will cost you your career." After the call ended, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows, trying to process the sudden reversal of his circumstances. 3 hours ago, he'd been facing termination. Now he was being asked to help reshape hospital policy. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt exhausted, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting for so long that even victory felt surreal. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Oakwood Elementary. Mia had a wonderful morning. Her cut is healing nicely. Thought you'd like to know. Daniel smiled despite himself. The school knew. They knew he checked his phone for updates, knew he worried, knew he needed these small reassurances that his daughter was okay. He typed back, "Thank you so much." Then he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, set an alarm for 2:30 p.m., enough time to sleep and still pick Mia up from school, and lay down fully clothed on top of the covers. As sleep pulled him under, his last thought was of Sarah. She would have been proud, not because he'd won, but because he'd refused to apologize for being the father she'd trusted him to be. The battle wasn't over. There would be policy meetings, committee discussions, the slow bureaucratic machinery of institutional change. But for the first time in months, Daniel Harper allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to choose between being a good nurse and being a good father. Maybe he could be both. And maybe that had been the answer all along. Daniel woke to the sound of his alarm at 2:30 p.m., disoriented for a moment about which world he was in, the one where he'd been about to lose everything, or this strange new reality where his supervisor had apologized and promised change. His body ached with the particular exhaustion that came from working a 12-hour night shift, followed by emotional whiplash instead of proper sleep. He showered quickly, the hot water helping to clear the fog from his mind, and dressed in clean clothes that didn't smell like hospital antiseptic. By the time he pulled into the parking lot at Oakwood Elementary, he'd managed to arrange his face into something approximating normal, a father picking up his daughter, not a man whose entire life had nearly imploded before breakfast. Mia burst through the school doors at 3:30 on the dot, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she ran toward him. The small bandage on her forehead from yesterday's playground incident had already been replaced with a cartoon character Band-Aid, probably courtesy of the school nurse. "Daddy!" She launched herself into his arms with the full-body enthusiasm of a 7-year-old who hadn't seen her parent in what felt like forever, even though it had only been since morning. "Guess what? We had art today, and I made a clay turtle, and Mrs. Harrison said it was the best one in the whole class." Daniel held her tight, breathing in the scent of school, crayons and cafeteria food and playground dust. "A turtle? That's amazing, Bean. Is it going to live in the kiln now?" "Yeah, for like a week. Then I can paint it and bring it home." She pulled back to study his face with that unnerving perception she'd inherited from her mother. "You look tired. Did you sleep?" "A little. Enough." He guided her toward the car, one hand on her shoulder. "How's your forehead feeling?" "It doesn't hurt at all. See?" She peeled back the Band-Aid to show him a small scrape, already scabbing over. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze him, physically and emotionally. Mia had weathered the loss of her mother at 3 years old, adapted to her father's night shift schedule, learned to be independent beyond her years, and still managed to bounce through life with joy that seemed undiminished. "Looks good. You're healing fast." He buckled her into the booster seat in the back of his Honda. "What do you say we stop for ice cream on the way home?" Mia's eyes widened. Ice cream on a Tuesday? Is it a special occasion?" Daniel paused with his hand on the car door. "How did you explain to a 7-year-old that you were celebrating not losing your job, not having to uproot her life, not failing the promise you'd made to her dying mother?" "Just felt like celebrating you. Is that okay?" "That's definitely okay." She grinned, gap-toothed and beautiful. "Can I get chocolate chip cookie dough?" "You can get whatever you want, Mia Bean." They sat in the ice cream shop's outdoor seating area, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Mia attacked her cone with single-minded focus, while Daniel picked at his vanilla, watching her and thinking about how close he'd come to losing this, these ordinary moments that made up the architecture of their life together. "Daddy, you're staring," Mia said, ice cream dotting her upper lip. "That's what you always tell me not to do." "Sorry, just thinking about how lucky I am." "Because of me? Absolutely because of you." She considered this while licking a drip that threatened to escape down the side of her cone. "Mrs. Chen says you work too hard because you love me so much. Is that true?" Daniel felt his throat tighten. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched Mia in the evenings before bed when Daniel worked nights, had become something of a surrogate grandmother. She saw things he tried to hide. Mrs. Chen is very smart. But you like your job, right? Helping the sick kids? I love my job. And I love you. Both things can be true. That's good. Mia swung her legs under the table, her sneakers not quite reaching the ground. Because I love school and I love you, and both things are true for me too. They finished their ice cream and drove home through neighborhoods Daniel knew by heart. The route he'd driven thousands of times, to and from work, to and from school. The geography of a life built one careful mile at a time. Their house came into view, small and ordinary and perfect, the grass needing to be mowed, Sarah's flower beds now tended by Daniel with less skill but equal devotion. Inside, Mia settled at the kitchen table with her homework while Daniel started preparing dinner. Chicken stir-fry, vegetables cut into shapes Mia would actually eat, rice in the cooker. The domestic rhythm of their evenings was so deeply ingrained he could do it half asleep, which was fortunate given how often he had to. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Matthews. Policy review meeting scheduled for Thursday, 10 a.m. Your input requested. Rebecca Cole will also attend. Are you available? Daniel stared at the message, still processing the surreal turn his life had taken. 24 hours ago, he'd been facing termination. Now he was being asked to help reshape hospital policy. He texted back. I'll be there. Daddy, how do you spell butterfly? Mia called from the table, pencil poised over her spelling homework. Sound it out first. What do you hear? Butterfly, she wrote carefully, her tongue poking out in concentration. Butterfli. Close. The TT in butter is 2 T's, and Y at the end instead of I's. She erased and corrected, then looked up with satisfaction. Done. Can I watch TV before dinner? 20 minutes. Educational shows only. Nature documentaries count as educational, right? Daniel smiled despite himself. Yes, Bean. Nature documentaries count. While Mia settled on the couch with a show about ocean creatures, Daniel finished cooking and found his mind drifting to the meeting ahead. What did it actually mean to create structured flexibility for caregivers? How did you balance the legitimate need for professional boundaries with the reality that nurses were human beings with lives and responsibilities outside the hospital? His phone rang. Maria Rodriguez. Tell me everything, she demanded without preamble. You said you'd explain tonight, and your shift starts in 3 hours. Talk. Daniel gave her the abbreviated version. The meeting, Rebecca's emergency, his offer to help, the phone call that followed. When he finished, Maria was silent for a long moment. Holy shit, she said finally. Danny, that's incredible. You basically Jedi mind tricked her into realizing she was wrong. I didn't trick anyone. I just showed her what compassion looks like, I guess. Even when someone doesn't deserve it. Especially when someone doesn't deserve it. That's the whole point. Maria's voice softened. Sarah would be proud of you. You know that, right? The mention of his wife's name still hit like a fist to the sternum, even 4 years later. I hope so. I'm trying. You're doing more than trying. You're actually living the values this hospital claims to care about. Patient-centered care, holistic approach, treating people with dignity. You do all of that naturally. Rebecca was too blind to see it. She sees it now, or at least she's starting to. After the call ended, Daniel served dinner and sat across from Mia while she narrated her entire day in exhaustive detail. The clay turtle, the math worksheet about addition, the game at recess where she'd been a dolphin, the book her teacher had read about a girl who found a magic garden. He listened with the attention these stories deserved, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, storing away each detail in the mental file he kept of her childhood. At 6:30, Mrs. Chen arrived to stay with Mia until bedtime. The elderly Chinese woman had lived next door for 30 years and had known Sarah, had brought soup and dumplings in those first terrible months after the funeral, had quietly appointed herself the grandmother Mia needed. You look better tonight, Mrs. Chen observed, studying Daniel's face with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Less worried. Things are looking up. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Good. This one, she nodded toward Mia. She needs you not so worried. Children feel everything. Daniel hugged Mia goodbye, reminded her to brush her teeth and listen to Mrs. Chen, and headed to St. Catherine's for his night shift. The drive felt different somehow, lighter, as if the weight he'd been carrying had been partially lifted. The PICU was in controlled chaos when he arrived. 2 new admissions, a premature baby in respiratory distress, a 6-year-old post-op from emergency appendectomy. Daniel changed into his scrubs and dove into the work, taking report from the day shift nurse assigned to his patients. Emma Morrison had a good day, the nurse told him. Oxygen stayed stable, took 2 full bottles. Parents are optimistic. Daniel made his rounds, checking on each child in his care. In room 412, Emma slept peacefully in her isolette, her tiny chest rising and falling with the mechanical assistance of the ventilator. Sarah Morrison sat beside her, reading a book in the dim light. "Mr. Harper," she said, looking up with a tired smile. "I was hoping you'd be on tonight. How are you holding up?" "We're managing. Jim's at home sleeping. We're trying to make sure at least one of us is functional at any given time." She set down her book and moved closer to Emma's isolette. "The doctors say if she keeps improving like this, we might be able to try room air breathing in a few weeks." "That's wonderful news." Daniel checked Emma's vitals, made a small adjustment to her feeding tube. "She's a fighter. She gets that from her mom," Sarah said with a wry smile, then paused. "Can I ask you something? You mentioned you have a daughter. How do you do it? Balance this job with being a parent. Every time I'm here, I feel guilty about not being home. Every time I'm home, I feel guilty about not being here." Daniel finished his documentation before answering, choosing his words carefully. "You do the best you can in each moment. That's all anyone can do. Emma needs you both, the you that's here being her advocate, and the you that's home taking care of yourself so you can keep being here. There's no perfect balance. There's just showing up and loving her through all of it. Do you ever feel like you're failing at both?" The question hit closer than she could know. "All the time. But then I remember that trying and occasionally failing is better than not trying at all." Sarah nodded slowly. "Thank you for understanding and for taking care of Emma like she's yours." The night progressed with its familiar rhythm. Medications administered, vitals checked, charts updated, parents comforted, crises averted. Around 2 a.m., during a lull, Daniel found Maria at the nurse's station. "So Thursday's the big meeting," she said, pulling up a chair beside him. "You nervous?" "Terrified. I'm a nurse, not a policymaker. What do I even know about institutional reform?" "You know what it's like to live on the receiving end of bad policy. That's more valuable than any administrative degree." Maria logged into her computer and pulled up the hospital's current personal device policy. "Look at this. Personal mobile devices may only be used during designated break periods in approved areas. It's so rigid, it's practically begging people to violate it." Daniel read over her shoulder. "So what would be better? What would have helped you? What would have made it possible to check on Mia without Rebecca losing her mind about it?" He thought about the past 3 months, the constant anxiety about missing urgent messages, the fear of being caught caring about his daughter. Clear guidelines about what constitutes appropriate brief communication, something that acknowledges we're humans with families, not robots who clock in and stop existing as people. "Oh, okay, so draft that. Write down what you wish the policy had been. Bring it to the meeting." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. You're just used to it being impossible." Maria glanced toward the hallway where a call light had just illuminated. "That's my patient. But seriously, Danny, write it down. The worst they can do is say no." After Maria left, Daniel pulled up a blank document on the computer and stared at it. What did humane policy look like in a healthcare setting? How did you honor both patient safety and employee well-being? He started typing, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Proposed revisions to personal device policy. A caregiver-centered approach. Current policy creates an impossible standard that fails to acknowledge the reality of healthcare workers' lives. Many nurses, doctors, and support staff are also parents, caregivers for elderly relatives, or managing personal medical situations that require occasional brief communication during work hours. Proposed framework. Brief, necessary personal communications are permitted during work hours under the following guidelines. Communications must not exceed 60 seconds in duration. Communications must not occur during active patient care or emergency situations. Communications must be documented if they occur more than twice per shift. Emergency family situations may require longer communications. Notify charge nurse for coverage. This approach recognizes that healthcare workers who feel secure about their family's well-being are better able to focus on patient care. A nurse who can verify their child arrived safely home is more present, not less, than a nurse consumed with anxiety about an unanswered text. He read it over, made revisions, read it again. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It acknowledged the tension between professional standards and human needs without pretending one could erase the other. At 4 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text. He pulled it from his pocket carefully, aware of the irony of checking his personal device while drafting policy about personal device usage. It was from Rebecca Cole. "How is Emma Morrison tonight? I saw her family earlier and promised I'd check in." Daniel blinked at the message, surprised by the personal touch from someone who'd seemed so determinedly impersonal for months. He typed back, "Stable and improving. Parents are cautiously optimistic." 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then, "Good. I've been thinking about what you said, about compassion coming from somewhere. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way. Thank you for reminding me." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment before responding. We all forget sometimes. The important thing is remembering. The rest of his shift passed without incident. He handed off his patients to the day shift at 7 a.m., changed out of his scrubs, and drove home through streets painted pink and gold with sunrise. The world felt subtly different, as if something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of his life. At home, Mia was still asleep. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the document he'd drafted during the night. It still needed work, needed input from others, needed to be shaped into something that could actually function as policy. But it was a start. His phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was local. "Hello? Mr. Harper, this is Jennifer Matthews from HR. I hope I'm not calling too early." Daniel glanced at the clock, 7:45 a.m. "No, I just got home from my shift. Is everything okay?" "More than okay. I wanted to give you a heads up before Thursday's meeting. I spent yesterday reviewing your personnel file in detail, and I also spoke with several other nurses in the PICU, some of your patients' families, and the previous department supervisor who retired last year." Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. And? And the picture that emerged is completely at odds with Miss Cole's documentation. "You're not just a competent nurse, Mr. Harper. You're exceptional. Parents request you by name. Your colleagues describe you as the person they want caring for their own children. Your former supervisor said, and I quote, 'Daniel Harper is the heart of that unit.'" Something unfamiliar bloomed in Daniel's chest. Vindication, maybe, or relief so profound it felt like pain. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. But I want you to know that this isn't just about revising a policy to accommodate your situation. This is about recognizing that we almost lost an invaluable employee because of a rigid system that failed to see the whole person. That's unacceptable." "Thank you," Daniel managed. "Come to Thursday's meeting with ideas, real, practical ideas about how we can do better. Not just for you, but for everyone trying to balance caregiving responsibilities with their careers. Can you do that?" "Yes. I've actually already started drafting something." "Perfect. Send it to me by Wednesday afternoon and I'll distribute it to the committee." She paused. "One more thing. Miss Cole called me yesterday. Her mother's surgery went well. They repaired the hip fracture. But Rebecca spent the night at the hospital with her and apparently had something of an epiphany about work-life balance and the expectations she's been placing on herself and others. Is she okay? She's reevaluating some things. I think that's healthy." Jennifer's tone softened. "What you did, offering to help her when she was trying to fire you, that took character. It also probably saved this department from a lawsuit when we terminated an exemplary employee for discriminatory reasons." After the call ended, Daniel sat in his kitchen, watching morning light creep across the floor, and tried to process the strange turns his life had taken in less than 48 hours. He'd gone from facing termination to being praised as invaluable. Rebecca had gone from his antagonist to someone capable of genuine reflection. The whole situation had inverted itself like a geometric puzzle, reshaping into something new. Footsteps on the stairs. Mia appeared in her unicorn pajamas, hair standing up in all directions, clutching her stuffed elephant. "Morning, Bean. You're up early. I heard you talking on the phone. Is everything okay?" He pulled her into his lap, marveling as always at how big she was getting, 7 years old, all gangly limbs and curiosity, so far from the tiny baby she'd been when Sarah died. "Everything's really okay. Better than okay. Things at work are getting better." "Does that mean you won't get fired for checking on me?" The question landed like a stone in still water. He'd tried so hard to shield her from his work stress, but of course she'd known. Children always knew. "I was never going to let that happen, Mia. But yes, things are definitely better now. My boss and I had a big talk and we figured some things out." "Did you tell her I'm worth checking on?" Daniel felt his eyes burn. "I told her you're worth everything." Mia hugged him tight, her small arms surprisingly strong around his neck. "I'm glad you didn't get fired, Daddy. Who would take care of the sick kids if you weren't there?" "There are other nurses, Bean, but you're the best one," Mrs. Morrison told me. "When I met her at the hospital that time, you had to bring me to work, remember? She said you saved Emma's life, and you're the best nurse in the whole hospital." Daniel had forgotten that day, 6 months ago, when his backup childcare had fallen through, and he'd had to bring Mia to work for an hour until Mrs. Chen could pick her up. Sarah Morrison had been in the waiting area and had struck up a conversation with Mia, not knowing she was talking to his daughter. "She said that?" "Yep. So you can't get fired because Emma needs you, and all the other kids too." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. His daughter had understood what Rebecca hadn't, that his capacity to care for her and his capacity to care for his patients came from the same source. They weren't competing commitments, they were complementary ones. Wednesday afternoon, Daniel sent his policy draft to Jennifer Matthews. He'd refined it over 2 days, incorporating feedback from Maria and several other nurses, shaping it into something that felt both practical and humane. The core remained the same: acknowledgement that healthcare workers were whole humans with families and responsibilities that didn't vanish the moment they clocked in. Jennifer replied within an hour. "This is excellent. Exactly the kind of thinking we need. See you tomorrow." Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Daniel dropped Mia at school, drove to St. Catherine's, and found himself walking toward the administrative building with something that felt almost like confidence. The conference room was larger than he'd expected, with a long table surrounded by chairs. Jennifer Matthews was already there, along with 2 people Daniel didn't recognize: a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, and a woman about Daniel's age with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Harper, thank you for coming. This is Dr. Richard Patel, head of our Human Resources Advisory Committee, and Dr. Lisa Chang, our hospital ombudsman. They'll be joining us for this discussion." Daniel shook hands with both, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. This was more official than he'd anticipated. "Ms. Cole should be here any moment," Jennifer continued. "In the meantime, why don't we—" The door opened and Rebecca entered. She looked different somehow. Tired, yes, but softer around the edges. Her usual armor of professional perfection seemed to have developed cracks. "I apologize for being late," she said, taking a seat across from Daniel. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw something in her expression he'd never seen before: uncertainty. "How's your mother?" Daniel asked. "Recovering well. She'll need physical therapy, but the prognosis is good." Rebecca set down her bag and folded her hands on the table. "Thank you for asking, and thank you again for covering for me that morning. I know I didn't deserve that kindness." Everyone deserves kindness when they're scared for someone they love. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Shall we begin? Ms. Matthews has circulated Mr. Harper's proposed policy revisions. I'd like to start by saying this is some of the most thoughtful work I've seen from a frontline employee in my 15 years here. It's practical, compassionate, and addresses a real gap in our current approach." Daniel felt heat rise in his face. "Thank you. I just tried to think about what would actually help people do their jobs better." "Which is exactly the right lens," Dr. Chang added. "Too often we create policies that serve administrative convenience rather than employee well-being. This proposal flips that script." Jennifer pulled up Daniel's document on the screen at the front of the room. Let's go through it section by section. The core framework allows brief personal communications during work hours with clear parameters. Mr. Harper, walk us through your thinking. For the next hour, they dissected every element of the proposal. Daniel explained his reasoning, answered questions, incorporated suggestions. Rebecca, to his surprise, contributed thoughtfully, adding perspective from a supervisor's standpoint about how to implement such changes without sacrificing patient safety. The documentation requirement is key, Rebecca said at one point, not to punish staff, but to identify patterns that might indicate someone is overwhelmed and needs additional support. If a nurse is making 10 personal calls per shift, that's not a discipline issue. It's a sign they might need help managing a personal crisis. Exactly, Daniel agreed. This isn't about creating loopholes. It's about creating space for human reality within professional expectations. Dr. Patel nodded approvingly. What about emergency situations? How do we define those? I think we trust our staff, Daniel said. If someone's child is in the ER, that's clearly an emergency. If their elderly parent's caregiver doesn't show up, that requires more than 60 seconds to resolve. We build in notification requirements, tell your charge nurse, arrange coverage, but we don't force people to choose between family crises and their jobs. And you believe this won't compromise patient care, Schutz? Dr. Chang asked. I believe the opposite. Staff who know they won't be punished for having families are more focused when they're here, not less. Anxiety is more distracting than a 30-second text message. Rebecca spoke up quietly. I can attest to that. This week has shown me how impossible it is to focus on work when you're terrified about what's happening at home. Mr. Harper was right. Compassion comes from somewhere. We can't ask our staff to provide compassionate care while denying them compassion for their own lives. The room fell silent. Jennifer made notes on her tablet. Dr. Patel exchanged glances with Dr. Chang. Finally, Jennifer spoke. I'm going to recommend we implement this policy on a trial basis in the PICU, with the intention of hospital-wide rollout if successful. Mr. Harper, would you be willing to serve on an ongoing committee to assess effectiveness and make adjustments? Yes, absolutely. Ms. Cole, you'll oversee implementation in your department. I'd like weekly reports on how it's working. Any issues that arise, suggestions for improvement. Rebecca nodded. Of course, and I'd like to formally apologize in front of these witnesses for the way I handled the initial concerns. Mr. Harper's situation should have prompted a policy review, not disciplinary action. I let my own blind spots affect my judgment, and that was wrong. Daniel felt the sincerity in her words. We both learned something from this. That's what matters. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of follow-up. As everyone gathered their materials, Rebecca approached Daniel. Could we talk for a moment? Privately? They stepped into an empty conference room down the hall. Rebecca closed the door and turned to face him, her professional mask completely gone. I need you to understand something, she said. When I started documenting your violations, I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing. I saw you checking your phone, and I saw a nurse not fully present with patients. It never occurred to me that those 30-second checks were what allowed you to be fully present the other 11 hours and 59 minutes of your shift. You had rules to enforce. I understand that. No, it was more than that. It was judgment. I judged you for being a single parent who brought your personal life to work. And the reason I judged you... She paused, struggling with the words. The reason I judged you is because you were doing what I couldn't do. You were choosing your daughter without apology. And I've been abandoning my mother for 2 years while telling myself it was professional necessity. Daniel leaned against the conference table. Rebecca, you're not abandoning her. You moved her to a good facility. You make sure she has excellent care. But I don't visit enough. I don't call enough. I prioritize work over her constantly. And when I saw you refusing to do that with Mia, it forced me to confront my own choices. So I tried to make you wrong. If I could prove that being a devoted parent made you a bad nurse, then I was justified in being a mediocre daughter. Except I'm not a bad nurse. You're an extraordinary nurse. Everyone told me that except me. I was so committed to my narrative that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. She met his eyes. When my mother fell and you offered to help, even after everything I'd done, that broke something open in me. I spent that whole night in the hospital with her, and she kept apologizing for being a burden. 83 years old, and she was apologizing to me for falling, for needing surgery, for disrupting my schedule. Rebecca's voice cracked. And I realized that's what I'd taught her, that she was an inconvenience, that my career was more important than her life. And I hated myself for it. It's not too late to change that pattern. I know, I'm already making changes. I've arranged to work 3 12-hour shifts instead of 5 8s, so I have full days to spend with her. I'm going to visit twice a week minimum, and I'm going to stop pretending that being needed by someone I love is a weakness instead of a privilege. Daniel thought about Mia, about the countless times her need for him had been framed as a problem rather than the point of everything. It's the biggest privilege there is. They stood there in the quiet conference room, two people who'd been on opposite sides of a battle neither of them had really wanted to fight, finding unexpected common ground in the shared understanding that loving someone was never the thing you should apologize for. I hope we can start over, Rebecca said finally, as colleagues who respect each other. I'd like that. Daniel extended his hand and she shook it firmly. As he drove home that afternoon, Daniel's phone rang. Maria. So? She demanded. How'd it go? They're implementing the new policy, trial basis in the PICU, then hospital-wide if it works. Maria's whoop was so loud Daniel had to pull the phone away from his ear. Danny, that's incredible. You just changed this entire hospital. We'll see. Lots of things can go wrong between now and actual implementation. Stop being modest. You stood up for yourself and it mattered. That's huge. Maybe it was. Daniel was still processing the surreal quality of the whole situation. The way crisis had transformed into opportunity. The way Rebecca had shifted from antagonist to ally. The way his quiet insistence on being both a father and a nurse had created ripples he never anticipated. He picked Mia up from school and took her to the park, pushing her on the swings while she shrieked with laughter and demanded higher, higher, like children had been demanding since the invention of swings. The autumn sun was warm on his face, and his daughter's joy was a physical thing he could almost hold in his hands. Daddy, watch me jump, Mia called from the top of the slide. I'm watching, Bean. Be careful. She slid down and landed in the mulch with both feet, arms raised in triumph. Did you see? I'm the bravest. The absolute bravest. Later, making dinner while Mia did homework at the kitchen table, Daniel's phone buzzed with an email from Jennifer Matthews. The subject line read, New Policy Implementation Timeline. He opened it to find a detailed plan for rolling out the revised personal device policy, complete with staff training sessions, feedback mechanisms, and quarterly reviews. At the bottom was a note. Thank you for your leadership on this, Daniel. You've made St. Catherine's a better place. Leadership. The word felt strange applied to him. He was just a nurse trying to do his job and raise his daughter. But maybe that was what leadership looked like sometimes. Not grand gestures, but steady insistence on doing what was right, even when it cost you something. That night, tucking Mia into bed, she looked up at him with those amber-green eyes so much like Sarah's. Daddy, are things really better now at work? Yeah, Bean, they really are. Good, because I like it when you're happy. You haven't been happy in a long time. The observation stung in its accuracy. I'm sorry you noticed that. It's okay. Mommies and daddies don't have to be happy all the time. Mrs. Chen told me that. She said sometimes grown-ups have hard things, and kids can help by being good and patient. Daniel brushed hair back from her forehead, overcome with love for this small person who was wise beyond her years. You help just by being you. You know that, right? You don't have to be good or patient or anything except exactly who you are. I know, but I like helping anyway. She yawned, fighting sleep. Daddy? When I'm big, I want to be a nurse like you, so I can help people and be brave. You're already brave, Mia Bean, the bravest person I know. He stayed beside her until her breathing deepened into sleep, watching her face in the dim glow of her nightlight. This was worth fighting for. Worth standing up to Rebecca, worth the stress and fear and uncertainty, worth everything. His phone buzzed with one final message. Rebecca Cole, thank you for today, and for showing me that being human isn't weakness. My mother and I talked tonight, really talked, for the first time in months. You gave me that. Daniel typed back. We gave each other something, I think. Here's to being human. He turned off his phone and sat in the quiet of his house, listening to it settle around him. Tomorrow he'd go back to work under a new policy he'd helped create. Next week there would be committee meetings and implementation challenges and all the messy work of turning ideals into practice. But tonight, in this moment, he let himself simply feel the profound relief of having fought for what mattered and won. Not just for himself, but for every nurse who'd ever felt torn between work and family. For every parent who'd been made to feel that loving their child was unprofessional. For everyone trying to be whole humans in a world that wanted to divide them into neat categories. The battle was over. The real work was just beginning. And Daniel Harper, pediatric ICU nurse and devoted single father, was finally ready for both. The new policy went into effect on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after that pivotal meeting. Daniel arrived for his night shift to find the entire PICU staff gathered in the conference room for what Rebecca had termed a transition briefing. The atmosphere was cautiously optimistic. Nurses who'd spent years tiptoeing around rigid rules now faced the prospect of actual flexibility, and nobody quite believed it yet. Rebecca stood at the front of the room, a printed copy of the new guidelines in her hands. She looked different these days, Daniel noticed. Less rigid. She smiled more often, though the smiles were still tentative, like someone relearning a language they'd forgotten. "Before we begin," Rebecca said, her voice carrying that crisp authority that came naturally to her, "I want to acknowledge that this change is largely due to one person's courage to challenge a system that wasn't working." Daniel Harper refused to apologize for being a father, and that refusal made all of us examine our assumptions about professionalism and compassion. Every head in the room turned toward Daniel. He felt heat crawl up his neck. "The new personal device policy," Rebecca continued, pulling attention mercifully back to herself, "is not permission to spend your shift on your phone. It's acknowledgement that brief, necessary personal communications make you better nurses, not worse ones. You'll find the full guidelines in your email, but the key points are these. Communications under 60 seconds are permitted during natural lulls in patient care. Emergency situations require notification to your charge nurse but will not be penalized, and any pattern of excessive usage will trigger a supportive conversation, not disciplinary action." Maria raised her hand. "Define supportive conversation." "It means," Rebecca said, and Daniel heard something new in her voice, vulnerability maybe, "that if someone is making 10 calls per shift, we assume they're dealing with a crisis and we ask how we can help. Maybe they need temporary schedule adjustment. Maybe they need resources for childcare or elder care. Maybe they just need someone to listen. The point is to support our staff, not punish them for being human." A younger nurse named Kelly spoke up. "What if we're not sure whether something qualifies as brief and necessary?" "Use your judgment," Rebecca replied. "You're intelligent professionals. You know the difference between checking that your kid got home safe and scrolling through social media. If you're uncertain, err on the side of patient care, and we'll discuss it without assuming bad intent." The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering implementation details and answering questions. When it ended, several nurses approached Daniel directly. "Thank you," said James Chen, a PICU nurse whose wife had just had twins. "I've been terrified about missing texts from the nanny. This changes everything." "My mom has dementia," another nurse confided quietly. "Her caregiver texts me updates throughout the day. I've been sneaking to the bathroom to check my phone. Now I don't have to hide." But story after story, each one a variation on the same theme. People who'd been forced to pretend they had no life outside the hospital, suddenly given permission to be whole humans. Daniel had known intellectually that his situation wasn't unique, but hearing it articulated by his colleagues drove home just how widespread the problem had been. That first week passed without incident. Nurses checked their phones briefly and returned to work. The sky did not fall. Patient care did not suffer. If anything, the atmosphere in the PICU lightened perceptibly, as if everyone had been holding their breath for months and could finally exhale. On Thursday, Daniel was checking Emma Morrison's vitals when Sarah Morrison arrived for her evening visit. The baby had been weaned off the ventilator 2 days earlier and was breathing room air for the first time in her short life. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, staring at her daughter with wonder. Emma's face was finally visible without the breathing tube, revealing delicate features and a rosebud mouth. "I can actually see her." "She's doing remarkably well," Daniel assured her. "If this progress continues, we might be talking about discharge in a few weeks." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Really? She could come home? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but yes, it's looking positive. Sarah reached through the isolette's porthole to touch Emma's tiny hand. When you first told me about your daughter, about balancing work and family, I didn't realize you were fighting to keep your job. I heard about the new policy. Rebecca told me you were the one who pushed for it. Daniel adjusted Emma's feeding tube, uncomfortable with the praise. I just said what needed to be said. You did more than that. You reminded everyone here what actually matters. These babies, our children, they're why we do any of this. Not the policies or the procedures or the perfect documentation. Them. The conversation stayed with Daniel through the rest of his shift. At 3 a.m., during the quiet hours when the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm, he found himself at the nurses' station with Maria, both of them catching up on charting. You know what's weird? Maria said, not looking up from her computer. I've checked my phone 3 times tonight and nobody's given me a dirty look. It's like living in an alternate universe. How's your sister doing? Daniel asked. Maria's younger sister had been going through a difficult divorce, and Maria had become her primary support system. Better. She signed the papers yesterday. It's done. Maria finally looked up, her dark eyes tired but relieved. And I was able to be there for her without worrying about losing my job. That's because of you, Danny. It's because Rebecca was willing to change. Rebecca changed because you showed her what the alternative looked like. You gave her a mirror she couldn't avoid looking into. At home the next morning, Daniel found Mia already awake and dressed for school, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen. The elderly woman had let herself in with the spare key he'd given her years ago and was helping Mia with her reading homework. Daddy! Mia jumped up to hug him. Mrs. Chen made congee for breakfast. You're spoiling us, Daniel told Mrs. Chen, but he was grateful. The savory rice porridge was warm and comforting, exactly what he needed after a long night. Someone has to make sure you eat properly, Mrs. Chen replied with the stern affection she'd perfected over the years. You look better this week, less worried in the eyes. Things are better at work, much better. Good. This one, she nodded toward Mia, she worries about you when you worry. Children are like that. They absorb everything. After Mrs. Chen left and Mia was occupied with her breakfast, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Meeting with hospital administration at 2 p.m. They want to discuss expanding the new policy hospital-wide. Can you attend? He stared at the message, pulse quickening. Hospital-wide implementation was the goal, but he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. He texted back, I work nights. Can we do 3 p.m.? I need to sleep. 3 p.m. works. Sorry for the short notice. At 2:45 p.m., after managing 4 hours of sleep that felt inadequate but would have to suffice, Daniel found himself back in the administrative building. This time, the conference room was packed. Jennifer Matthews, Rebecca Cole, Dr. Patel, Dr. Chang, and several people he didn't recognize wearing the kind of expensive suits that signaled high-level hospital administration. Mr. Harper, thank you for accommodating the schedule change, said a silver-haired man Daniel vaguely recognized as someone important. I'm Marcus Webb, Chief Operating Officer. We've been monitoring the PICU pilot program closely. Daniel took a seat, acutely aware that he was wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down, while everyone else looked boardroom-ready. The policy's only been active for a week. A very instructive week, said a woman in a navy pantsuit. I'm Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, Chief Medical Officer. We've been tracking patient care metrics, staff satisfaction indicators, and incident reports. The results are compelling. She pulled up a presentation on the screen. Daniel saw charts and graphs that apparently represented the PICU's performance over the past week compared to previous months. Patient satisfaction scores are up 8%, Dr. Okonkwo continued. Staff satisfaction, measured through daily pulse surveys, is up 12%. More significantly, we've seen a marked decrease in minor medication errors and charting mistakes, which we attribute to reduced staff anxiety. In 1 week, Daniel couldn't hide his skepticism. The human impact is immediate when you remove a major source of stress, Jennifer Matthews interjected. We're not claiming these results are conclusive yet, but they're promising enough to warrant expansion. Marcus Webb leaned forward, his expression serious. Here's what we're proposing. A phased rollout across all departments over the next 3 months, starting with high-stress units like the ER, surgical ICU, and oncology. Each department will have a designated liaison, someone like you, Mr. Harper, who can provide frontline perspective during implementation. You want me to help implement this everywhere? We want you to lead the implementation team, Dr. Okonkwo corrected. This was your vision. You understand the balance we're trying to strike. We need that perspective to ensure the policy works across different contexts. Daniel's mind raced. Leading an implementation team meant committee meetings, coordination across departments, a level of visibility he'd never sought. He was a bedside nurse, not an administrator. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, but I work full-time nights in the PICU. I'm not sure I have the bandwidth to— We'd adjust your schedule, Marcus Webb interrupted. 3 12-hour shifts in the PICU to maintain your clinical skills, plus dedicated time for policy implementation work. Same salary, same benefits, but with formal recognition of your expanded role. Rebecca spoke up. I've already agreed to do the same in the PICU. We'd be co-leading this initiative, Daniel. Your clinical expertise and my administrative experience. Daniel looked at her, trying to read the expression on her face. A month ago, she'd been trying to fire him. Now she was proposing they work together to reshape hospital culture. The surreal quality of his life showed no signs of diminishing. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Dr. Okonkwo said. We'd need your answer by Monday. This is a significant commitment, and we want you to be certain. The meeting continued for another hour, drilling down into logistics and timelines. By the time Daniel left the administrative building, his head was spinning. He drove to Oakwood Elementary on autopilot, arriving just as school let out. Mia emerged with her usual enthusiasm, but her smile faltered when she saw his face. Daddy, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Bean. Just had a big meeting at work. Lots to think about. About the new phone rules? Sort of. They want to make the new rules work everywhere in the hospital, not just where I work, and they want me to help. Mia considered this as they walked to the car. Is that good? I think so, but it means more work, more time away from you. She climbed into her booster seat and looked at him with those 2 wise eyes. But you'd still pick me up from school? Always. And tuck me in at night? Every single night I'm not working. Then it's okay. Mrs. Chen says important work is worth doing even when it's hard. Daniel buckled her in and pressed a kiss to her forehead. When did you get so smart? I was always smart. You just notice now. That evening, after Mia was settled with her homework and Daniel was making dinner, his phone rang. He almost didn't answer the unfamiliar number, but something made him pick up. Mr. Harper, this is James Morrison, Emma's father. Daniel's attention sharpened immediately. Is everything okay? Is Emma— She's fine. Sorry, I should have led with that. She's doing great, actually. I'm calling because Sarah and I heard about the meeting today, about them wanting you to lead the policy expansion. How did you— Rebecca mentioned it when she stopped by to check on Emma this afternoon. She's been visiting regularly. Did you know that? Anyway, Sarah and I wanted to say we hope you take it. What you've built in the PICU, that compassion, that understanding that families matter, the whole hospital needs that. Daniel stirred the pasta sauce, phone tucked against his shoulder. It's a lot to take on. I have my own family to think about. We know. That's exactly why you should do it. Because you understand what it's like to need flexibility, to be pulled in 2 directions, to love your kid more than anything, but also need to work. Most people making hospital policy have never lived that reality. After James hung up, Daniel stood in his kitchen, staring at nothing. The pasta water boiled over and he moved it mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere. This opportunity could change things not just for him, but for countless healthcare workers across the hospital. But it also meant more time, more energy, more pieces of himself parceled out to commitments beyond Mia. Daddy, the sauce is burning, Mia called from the table. He grabbed the pot off the burner, swearing under his breath. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. So much for dinner. Pizza night? He suggested sheepishly. Pizza night, Mia cheered, unfazed by the culinary disaster. While they waited for delivery, Daniel found himself telling Mia about the offer in terms she could understand. She listened with the intense focus she usually reserved for her favorite books. So you'd be like a teacher? She asked. Teaching the other hospitals how to be nice to moms and dads who work there? Something like that, yeah. And you'd still be a nurse? Part of the time. Mia thought about this, absently coloring a picture of a rainbow. Mommy used to say you were really good at helping people, like that was your superpower. The mention of Sarah hit Daniel in the chest. She said that? Yeah, when I was little and she was sick. She told me that Daddy's superpower was making people feel better, and that's why he was a nurse. Mia looked up from her coloring. If you can make the whole hospital better, isn't that using your superpower more? Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought for the second time in as many weeks. His 7-year-old daughter had just articulated what he'd been struggling to see clearly. This wasn't about taking on more work. It was about expanding the impact of work he was already doing. That night, after Mia was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a notepad and made 2 lists. The first was titled Reasons to Say No. Less time with Mia, more stress, stepping outside his comfort zone, risk of failure. The second was titled Reasons to Say Yes. Help more people, create lasting change, model advocacy for Mia, honor the struggle that got him here. He stared at both lists for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Rebecca. I'm in. Let's do this. Her response came within minutes. I was hoping you'd say that. We start Monday. And Daniel, thank you for giving me a second chance. He typed back, we all deserve second chances. Monday morning brought another shift in Daniel's carefully constructed routine. He dropped Mia at school, drove to St. Catherine's, and found himself in a conference room with Rebecca and representatives from 6 different hospital departments. The emergency department chief was there, along with supervisors from surgical ICU, oncology, labor and delivery, pediatrics, and general medicine. Rebecca opened the meeting with characteristic efficiency. Thank you all for coming. We're here because the PICU pilot program for our revised personal device policy has shown measurable positive outcomes in both staff well-being and patient care. Our goal is to implement similar guidelines across all departments, adapted to each unit's specific needs. A grizzled ER doctor named Tom Brennan spoke up immediately. The ER is different from PICU. We have people coming in with gunshot wounds, heart attacks, strokes. There's no such thing as a natural lull. Agreed, Daniel said, finding his voice. That's why implementation can't be one size fits all. In the ER, the standard might be different. Maybe personal communications happen during documented breaks, unless there's a genuine emergency. The principle stays the same. We trust our staff to balance personal needs with patient care. We just acknowledge that balance looks different in different contexts. And if someone abuses that trust, asked the oncology supervisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Patricia Winters. Then we have a conversation, Rebecca answered. Not a disciplinary hearing, a conversation. Because if someone is making excessive personal calls, the question isn't, how do we punish them? It's, what's happening in their life that needs this much attention, and how can we help? The meeting lasted 2 hours. They worked through each department's concerns, identifying unique challenges and potential solutions. By the end, they had a framework that honored the core principle of flexibility while respecting the specific demands of different units. Tom Brennan approached Daniel as everyone was leaving. You really think this will work? In my 20 years here, I've never seen administration give a damn about whether we have lives outside these walls. That's exactly why it has to work, Daniel replied. Because people like you have been putting in 20 years while pretending you don't have families, don't have emergencies, don't have humanity. That's not sustainable. My daughter's getting married next month, Tom said quietly. She asked me to walk her down the aisle at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. My shift doesn't end until 3 o'clock. I've been trying to figure out how to ask for coverage without making it seem like I can't handle my job. Daniel felt anger kindle in his chest, not at Tom, but at the system that made a father feel guilty for wanting to walk his daughter down the aisle. That's exactly the kind of thing this policy is meant to address. You shouldn't have to choose between your job and your daughter's wedding. In the old system, I would have, no question. Tom extended his hand. Thanks for fighting for this. For all of us. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, training sessions, and department-by-department implementation. Daniel maintained his clinical shifts in the PICU. He'd insisted on that, needing the grounding of bedside care. But his role had expanded in ways he was still processing. He found himself presenting to groups of nurses, explaining the philosophy behind the new policy. He fielded questions from skeptical staff who'd been burned by administrative promises before. He worked with Rebecca to develop training materials, assessment tools, metrics for measuring success. Rebecca proved to be an unexpected ally. She brought organizational skills and administrative fluency that Daniel lacked, while he provided the frontline perspective that kept their work grounded in reality. They developed a rhythm, a mutual respect built on complementary strengths. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling implementation meeting with the surgical ICU staff, Rebecca and Daniel found themselves in the hospital cafeteria, both too tired to go anywhere else. "Be honest," Rebecca said, picking at a salad she clearly had no intention of eating. "Do you ever regret pushing for this? It's become so much bigger than either of us anticipated." Daniel considered the question while sipping terrible coffee. "Sometimes I miss when my life was simpler, when all I had to worry about was my patients and Mia. But then I think about Tom Brennan getting to walk his daughter down the aisle, or James Chen not having to hide checking on his twins, or you getting to visit your mother without guilt. And no, I don't regret it." "My mother asked about you yesterday," Rebecca said. "She wanted to know more about the nurse who helped her daughter become human again." "How is she doing?" "Stronger every day. She's been in physical therapy and regaining mobility, and I've been there for every session. 3 months ago, I would have sent her aid. Now I go myself." Rebecca finally met his eyes. "You gave me my mother back, Daniel. Not just physically, but relationally. I was so busy being important at work that I forgot to be present in my own life." "You're being present now. That's what counts." "It's harder than I expected. Being vulnerable, admitting I need help, letting people see that I'm not perfectly in control all the time. But it's also better. More real." Their conversation was interrupted by a text on Daniel's phone. Oakwood Elementary. "Hi, Mr. Harper. Mia seems to be coming down with something. Slight fever. Can you pick her up early?" Daniel showed the message to Rebecca. "Exhibit A for why this policy matters." "Go," she said immediately. "I'll handle the rest of today's meetings. Family first." The phrase that had once been wielded against him was now an instruction from his supervisor. Daniel grabbed his coffee and headed for the exit, texting the school that he was on his way. He found Mia in the nurse's office, curled up on a cot with her stuffed elephant, looking small and miserable. Her forehead was warm when he pressed his hand against it. "Hey, Bean, not feeling good?" "My throat hurts and I'm cold." Daniel signed her out and carried her to the car, her head heavy against his shoulder. At home, he settled her on the couch with blankets and cartoons, took her temperature, 100.2 concerning but not critical, and made chamomile tea with honey. "Am I going to have to go to the hospital?" Mia asked, her voice small. "No, baby. Just a cold, I think. We'll keep an eye on that fever, but you're going to be fine." She relaxed visibly. Being the daughter of a nurse meant she knew more about illness than most 7-year-olds, which was both a blessing and a curse. "Are you going to work tonight?" Daniel had a shift scheduled, but looking at his daughter's flushed face, he knew where he needed to be. He texted Maria. "Mia's sick. Can you cover my shift?" Maria's response was immediate. "Of course. Tell Mia I hope she feels better." He showed Mia the message. "I'm staying home. We'll have a sick day together. But your patients will be taken care of by other excellent nurses. Right now, you're my patient." They spent the evening on the couch, Mia dozing intermittently while Daniel monitored her fever and scrolled through work emails on his phone. Around 8 p.m., Rebecca texted, "How's Mia?" "Fever, sore throat. Probably just a virus, but keeping watch. Take tomorrow off too. I'll arrange coverage. I'm scheduled for implementation meetings." "Which I can handle. Your daughter needs you. That's literally the whole point of what we've been fighting for." Daniel set down his phone and looked at Mia, now sleeping peacefully, her fever already starting to break. 6 months ago, calling out sick because Mia was sick would have been another mark against him, another piece of evidence that he couldn't balance work and family. Now his supervisor was ordering him to stay home. The world had shifted on its axis, and Daniel was still adjusting to the new gravity. By Wednesday, Mia's fever had broken and she was well enough to return to school. Daniel went back to work to find the hospital abuzz with news. The revised personal device policy was being featured in a healthcare industry publication, as an innovative approach to staff retention and well-being. "We're getting calls from other hospitals," Jennifer Matthews told him during an impromptu meeting. "They want to know how we did it, whether we've seen sustained improvements, if they can adapt our model." "It's been 6 weeks," Daniel protested. "We're still figuring this out ourselves." 6 weeks of measurable improvement across multiple metrics. Staff turnover is down, satisfaction is up, patient care quality indicators are stable or improving. The model works, Daniel, and people want to replicate it. That evening, Daniel received an email from the American Nurses Association asking if he'd be willing to speak at their annual conference about balancing professional standards with personal needs. He stared at the invitation, equal parts honored and terrified. Public speaking had never been his strength. His power had always been in the quiet, steady work of bedside care. He called Maria for advice. "Are you kidding?" she said. "Of course you should do it. This is your chance to influence nursing culture beyond just our hospital." "I'm not a speaker, Maria. I'm a PICU nurse who got tired of being punished for checking on his kid." Exactly. And there are thousands of nurses out there right now being punished for the same thing. They need to hear that it doesn't have to be that way, that someone fought back and won. Daniel thought about Tom Brennan's daughter's wedding, about James Chen's twins, about every nurse who'd ever felt torn between vocation and family. "Okay, I'll do it." The decision made, he found himself thinking about Sarah. She'd been the brave one in their marriage, the one who faced hard things head-on while he preferred to work quietly behind the scenes. But maybe he'd learned something from her. Maybe courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about doing the right thing even when your hands were shaking. Friday brought another development. Dr. Okonkwo called Daniel into her office to discuss creating a permanent position, Director of Staff Wellbeing and Policy Innovation. It would be a hybrid role, part clinical work, part policy development, with a salary increase and formal authority to advocate for staff needs across the hospital. "We need someone in this role permanently," Dr. Okonkwo explained. "Someone who understands both the clinical realities and the human needs. You've proven you can bridge that gap." "I need to think about it," Daniel said, though even as he spoke, he knew his answer. That weekend, he took Mia to visit Sarah's grave. They did this once a month, bringing fresh flowers and sitting on the grass while Mia told her mother about school and friends and all the small details that made up her life. "Daddy might get a new job," Mia announced to the headstone. "He'd still be a nurse, but also help make the hospital better for all the mommies and daddies who work there." "I think that's good, don't you, Mommy?" Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "What do you think, Bean? Should I take it?" Mia was quiet for a moment, running her fingers over the carved letters of her mother's name. "Mommy always said you were the bravest person she knew." "But you don't think you're brave. I think you should take the job because it would make you see what Mommy saw." Sometimes his daughter's wisdom gutted him. "When did you get so smart?" "I told you before. I was always smart." Monday morning, Daniel walked into Dr. Okonkwo's office and accepted the position. The news spread through the hospital faster than he'd anticipated. By lunch, he'd received congratulatory texts from colleagues across multiple departments, a handwritten note from Jennifer Matthews, and a bottle of champagne from Rebecca with a card that read simply, "You're going to change everything." That night, working his shift in the PICU, Daniel found himself at Emma Morrison's isolette. The baby was scheduled for discharge the following week, a miracle by any measure. Sarah Morrison was there, as always, watching her daughter with the fierce love that all parents understood. "I heard about your promotion," she said. "Emma and I, our whole family, we're proud of you. I'm just trying to make things better." "You already have. For us, for everyone here. Emma gets to go home because she had excellent care from nurses who weren't burned out, weren't distracted by anxiety about their own families, weren't punished for being human. That matters more than you know." As Daniel drove home in the pre-dawn hours, he thought about the strange journey that had brought him here, from facing termination to leading hospital-wide reform, from being punished for loving his daughter to being promoted specifically because he refused to stop. The world had shifted, and he had shifted with it, not because he sought attention or advancement, but because he'd insisted on a simple truth, that being a good parent made him a better nurse, not a worse one. And somehow, impossibly, the world had listened. 3 months into his new role as Director of Staff Wellbeing and Policy Innovation, Daniel stood in front of 200 nurses at the American Nurses Association conference, his hands trembling despite the carefully rehearsed speech in his pocket. The auditorium stretched before him, faces turned expectantly toward the stage, and he felt the weight of every story he was about to tell. Not just his own, but the collective struggle of everyone who'd ever been forced to choose between career and compassion. "My name is Daniel Harper," he began, his voice catching slightly on the microphone. "And 2 years ago, I was almost fired for being a good father." The room went silent, the kind of stillness that came from recognition. He saw it in their faces, the knowing, the shared experience, the relief of finally hearing someone speak the truth out loud. He told them everything. The 17 documented violations, Rebecca's cold efficiency in building a case against him, the HR meeting that had nearly ended his career. But more than that, he told them about the moment everything changed, when Rebecca's mother fell, when crisis revealed hypocrisy, when offering compassion to someone who'd shown him none became the catalyst for institutional transformation. "The policy we created isn't radical," Daniel continued, finding his rhythm now. "It's humane. It acknowledges that the same empathy that makes us excellent nurses doesn't shut off when we worry about our children. It recognizes that supporting our staff's whole lives makes them better caregivers, not worse ones." During the question and answer session, a young nurse in the third row raised her hand. "How did you convince administration? My hospital won't even discuss flexible scheduling." "I didn't convince them with data, at least not initially. I convinced them by refusing to apologize for being human. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand firm in your truth and let others deal with their discomfort." Another hand shot up. "What about pushback? Surely not everyone supported this." Daniel thought about the early resistance, the skeptical department heads who'd insisted flexibility would lead to chaos. Of course there was pushback. Change threatens people who've built their identity around the old system. But we had something stronger than their resistance. We had measurable results. Staff retention improved, patient satisfaction increased, burnout decreased. When you can prove that treating people like humans improves outcomes, opposition becomes harder to justify. After the presentation, Daniel was swarmed by nurses wanting to share their own stories. A labor and delivery nurse from Ohio, whose supervisor had written her up for crying when her son called from college, homesick and struggling. An ER nurse from Florida who'd been denied time off when his father was dying. A pediatric oncology nurse from Texas who'd quit her job rather than miss her daughter's dance recital. Story after story, each one a variation on the same cruel choice: be present for your family or keep your job. The systemic nature of the problem hit Daniel with fresh force. This wasn't about individual bad supervisors. This was about a healthcare culture that demanded its workers sacrifice their humanity on the altar of professionalism. "How do I start this conversation at my hospital?" the Texas nurse asked, desperation evident in her voice. "Start by documenting everything," Daniel advised. "Every time you or a colleague faces this impossible choice, write it down. Build a case just like Rebecca built one against me, except make it a case for change instead of punishment. Then find your allies, HR, progressive administrators, patient advocates. Present the evidence and the solution together." As he flew back home that evening, Daniel felt the exhaustion of emotional exposure. Public speaking drained him in ways clinical work never did. But his phone was full of messages from nurses across the country, thanking him for giving voice to their struggle, asking for resources, reporting that they'd already scheduled meetings with their administrators. The ripples were spreading wider than he'd imagined possible. Back at St. Catherine's, the transformation continued to unfold in ways both large and small. The revised personal device policy had been fully implemented across all departments, and the data supported its success. Staff turnover had dropped by 18%. Patient satisfaction scores had climbed steadily. The hospital was saving money on recruitment and training while simultaneously improving care quality. But more than the metrics, Daniel saw the change in people's faces. The ER nurses who no longer ducked into supply closets to check on their kids. The oncology staff who could coordinate with their elderly parents' caregivers without fear. The surgical team who knew that a family emergency wouldn't cost them their careers. Rebecca had become an unexpected champion of the work, using her administrative authority to shield the program from bureaucratic interference. She and Daniel met weekly to assess implementation challenges and develop solutions. Their partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. I spoke with my mother's care facility this morning, Rebecca mentioned during one of their meetings, reviewing notes on her tablet without looking up. She's progressing well with physical therapy, might be able to return home with support services in a few months. That's wonderful. You must be relieved. Rebecca finally met his eyes. I am, and I'm also aware that 6 months ago, I would have received that news while sitting in this office, already planning how to manage it around my work schedule. Now my first thought was how to arrange my calendar to be there for her homecoming. That shift, that's because of you. It's because of both of us. You did the hard work of actually changing. Only because you showed me what I was missing. She returned to her tablet, but Daniel could see emotion working beneath her professional exterior. My mother asked if you'd come visit sometime. She wants to meet the man who gave her daughter back to her. The invitation touched Daniel more than he'd expected. I'd like that. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Jennifer Matthews entered, her expression serious in a way that immediately set Daniel on edge. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation. Channel 7 News is running a story tonight about workplace flexibility in healthcare. They're using St. Catherine's as their primary example and want interviews with both of you. Daniel felt his stomach drop. News coverage? We weren't prepared for that level of attention. Apparently word has spread beyond nursing circles, Jennifer explained. The healthcare business journals picked up the story, then the local media caught wind of it. They're framing it as hospital revolutionizes staff treatment. It's good press, but it means more scrutiny. Rebecca straightened, her organizational instincts kicking in immediately. What's their angle? Are they looking for controversy or genuine interest? Genuine interest, from what I can tell. The reporter, Amanda Chen, has a background in healthcare reporting. She wants to understand how the policy works and whether it can be replicated elsewhere. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged glances. We do the interviews, Rebecca decided. Transparency serves us better than avoidance. But we control the narrative. This isn't about one person or one policy. It's about a cultural shift in how we value healthcare workers. That evening, a news crew arrived at St. Catherine's. Daniel had gone home to change, trading his usual casual clothes for the one suit he owned, purchased for Sarah's funeral and rarely worn since. Mia had insisted on helping him with his tie, her small fingers surprisingly deft. You look fancy, Daddy, like a movie star. I look uncomfortable, he corrected, tugging at the collar. But thank you, Bean. Are you nervous about being on TV? More than she could know. A little. But sometimes important things require us to be brave even when we're nervous. Like when I had to give my book report in front of the whole class. Exactly like that. The interview took place in one of the hospital's consultation rooms, carefully staged to look both professional and approachable. Amanda Chen was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and direct, in a way Daniel immediately respected. She started with Rebecca, asking about the policy development process and administrative perspective. Rebecca answered with her characteristic precision, explaining the metrics and implementation strategies. But Daniel noticed something new in how she spoke, a warmth that hadn't been there 6 months ago. When Amanda asked what had prompted the change, Rebecca didn't hesitate. I was forcing my staff to live by standards I couldn't maintain myself. It took a personal crisis and a colleague's compassion to show me the hypocrisy. Daniel Harper offered me grace when I deserved consequences, and that changed everything. Then Amanda turned to Daniel. You were nearly fired for checking on your daughter. Now you're leading hospital-wide reform. How did that transformation happen? Daniel thought about all the ways he could answer. The policy meetings, the data analysis, the careful political navigation. But what came out was simpler and more honest. I refused to apologize for loving my daughter, not because I was trying to be revolutionary, but because I couldn't live with teaching her that my job mattered more than she did. When you stand firm in your truth, sometimes the world shifts to accommodate it. Not always, but sometimes, and this time it did. Your daughter is 7, correct? What does she think about all this? The question caught him off guard. She thinks I'm helping other mommies and daddies not get in trouble for loving their kids, which is probably the most accurate description of this work I've heard. Amanda smiled. Can we get footage of you in the PICU? Show you doing the work that nearly cost you your job? Daniel's clinical shift didn't start for another 2 hours, but he agreed. The camera crew followed him through the unit, capturing him checking on Emma Morrison, now thriving in her isolette, weeks away from discharge, and interacting with other patients and families. Sarah Morrison agreed to be interviewed, speaking eloquently about the difference compassionate care made. "Mr. Harper saved our daughter's life," Sarah told the camera, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Not just medically, but emotionally. He treated Emma like she was precious, not just a patient, and he did that while also being present for his own child. Those two things aren't contradictory, they're connected. You can't teach nurses to care about patients if you punish them for caring about their families." The segment aired 2 days later during the evening news. Daniel watched from his living room with Mia curled against his side, both of them eating popcorn like it was a movie instead of a news story that exposed their life to public scrutiny. "That's you, Daddy," Mia pointed at the screen. "You look so official." Daniel watched himself on television, still slightly surreal about the whole thing. The story was balanced and thoughtful, highlighting both the policy innovation and the human stories behind it. They'd included his quote about refusing to apologize for loving his daughter, and seeing it broadcast made the words feel more permanent somehow, like committing to a path there was no walking back from. His phone exploded with messages. Maria sent a string of celebration emojis. Mrs. Chen texted that half her church had seen the segment and thought Daniel was wonderful. Former colleagues from other hospitals reached out asking for advice. And buried in the flood of congratulations was a message from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Harper, this is Tom Brennan from the ER. My daughter saw the news story. She cried. She didn't know I'd almost missed her wedding because of work. Thank you for making it so I could walk her down that aisle. Thank you for fighting for all of us." Daniel read the message twice, emotion tightening his throat. This was why the discomfort of publicity mattered. This was why standing on that stage, sitting for that interview, exposing his life to scrutiny was worth it. Because somewhere, a daughter knew her father had fought to be there for her most important day. "You okay, Daddy?" Mia asked, looking up at him with concern. "Yeah, Bean. Just realizing that sometimes scary things turn out to be really good things." The news coverage triggered a cascade of responses. By the end of the week, Daniel had received invitations to speak at 3 more conferences, interview requests from 2 healthcare podcasts, and an inquiry from a publisher about writing a book on work-life balance in nursing. "This is getting overwhelming," he confessed to Rebecca during their weekly meeting. "I'm a bedside nurse. I don't know how to be a public figure." "You don't have to be a public figure, you just have to be yourself and tell the truth. That's been working so far." Rebecca pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. "But we do need to discuss capacity. You're getting pulled in multiple directions, and we need to ensure you're not sacrificing your well-being to advocate for everyone else's." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "What do you suggest?" "We hire support staff, a coordinator to manage speaking requests and media inquiries, maybe a research assistant to help with data analysis. You shouldn't be doing all this alone." "The budget has already been allocated. Dr. Okonkwo approved it yesterday. She sees this initiative as central to St. Catherine's mission and brand. We're becoming known as the hospital that values its staff, and that's attracting both talent and positive attention." Over the following weeks, Daniel's team expanded. They hired Monica Reeves, a former healthcare administrator with experience in change management, to coordinate the growing web of projects and presentations. A graduate student named Kevin Park came on board to help with research and data analysis. The work that had felt impossibly large when it was just Daniel began to feel manageable with support. But the most significant development came from an unexpected direction. During a routine check-in with Dr. Okonkwo, she mentioned that the hospital's board of directors wanted to meet with Daniel. "They want to discuss making St. Catherine's a model site for healthcare worker well-being," she explained. "Potentially partnering with universities to study the policy impact long-term, hosting training programs for other hospitals, becoming a center of excellence in this area." Daniel sat across from her, trying to process what she was suggesting. "That's a massive expansion of scope." "It is, but the data supports it. We've seen consistent improvement across every metric we're tracking. More importantly, we've seen cultural change. Staff morale is higher than it's been in years. People want to work here. We have nurses turning down higher-paying positions elsewhere because they value our culture. That's unprecedented. And the board thinks I should lead this expansion? The board thinks you already are leading it. They just want to formalize the structure and resources around what you've built. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward, her expression serious. Daniel, you've stumbled into something remarkable. Not because you sought glory or advancement, but because you insisted on being treated like a human being. That authenticity resonates. People trust you because you're living the values you advocate for. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Daniel spent the weekend preparing a presentation, working late into the night after Mia went to bed, fueled by coffee and the surreal awareness that his life had become unrecognizable from what it had been a year ago. Mia noticed his stress. On Sunday morning, she climbed into his lap while he was reviewing notes at the kitchen table. "Daddy, you're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you worry so much your forehead gets all wrinkly and you forget to smile." "Yeah." Daniel set down his papers and wrapped his arms around her. "Sorry, Bean. Big week ahead." "Is it scary?" "A little. I have to talk to very important people about very important things." "But you're good at talking to important people. You talk to sick kids and their scared parents every day. Those are the most important people there are." Her logic was flawless and humbling. "When did you become so wise?" "I keep telling you, I've always been wise. You just keep forgetting." The board meeting took place in St. Catherine's executive conference room, a space Daniel had never entered in his 8 years at the hospital. The room screamed power and money, mahogany table, leather chairs, original artwork on the walls. 12 board members sat around the table, most of them in expensive suits, all of them studying Daniel with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. He gave his presentation, walking them through the policy development, implementation challenges, measured outcomes, and vision for expansion. He showed them the retention data, the satisfaction scores, the patient care metrics. But more than numbers, he told them stories. Tom Brennan's daughter's wedding, Emma Morrison's discharge, the Texas nurse who'd quit rather than miss her daughter's recital. "What you're proposing," said a silver-haired woman Daniel recognized as board chair Elizabeth Thornton, "is essentially redefining professional standards in healthcare to center staff well-being alongside patient care. That's a significant philosophical shift." "It is," Daniel agreed, "but it's also overdue. We've been operating under the assumption that sacrificing staff well-being somehow serves patients better. The data proves that's false. Happy, supported staff provide better care. It's not complicated." A younger board member in expensive glasses spoke up. "What about cost? Expanding this into a training center, partnering with universities, that requires significant investment." Daniel had anticipated this question. Monica had helped him prepare financial projections showing how reduced turnover and improved outcomes offset implementation costs, but he decided to lead with something else. "What's the cost of losing excellent nurses because they can't be both professionals and parents? What's the cost of burned-out staff making errors? What's the cost to your reputation when word spreads that St. Catherine's treats its workers as disposable?" He paused, letting the question sit. "The real question isn't whether we can afford to do this. It's whether we can afford not to." Elizabeth Thornton's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. "You're quite persuasive, Mr. Harper. Though I suspect that comes from genuine belief rather than practiced rhetoric. I'm persuasive because I'm talking about my life. This isn't theoretical for me. It's whether I can tuck my daughter in at night without fearing I'll lose my job for loving her. It's whether nurses like Maria Rodriguez can support their struggling siblings without hiding in supply closets to take phone calls. It's whether Tom Brennan gets to walk his daughter down the aisle. When you're fighting for real people's real lives, persuasion becomes pretty easy." The board deliberated for 30 minutes while Daniel waited outside with Rebecca and Dr. Okonkwo. He paced the hallway, nervous energy making stillness impossible. "You did well in there," Rebecca assured him. "Better than most executives who pitched to that board." "I probably came across as too emotional, too personal." "You came across as authentic," Dr. Okonkwo corrected. "That's exactly what they needed to see." When they called him back in, Elizabeth Thornton was smiling. "The board votes to approve your proposal with full funding for the next 3 years. We'll establish the Center for Healthcare Worker Wellbeing here at St. Catherine's, with you as founding director. We'll partner with 3 universities initially for research and training programs. and will commit to hosting quarterly workshops for other hospitals interested in implementing similar policies. Daniel felt lightheaded. Thank you. I won't let you down. See that you don't. This is a significant investment, Mr. Harper. We're betting on you because you've proven the model works. Now you need to prove it scales. Walking out of that boardroom, Daniel felt the weight of new responsibilities settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just about St. Catherine's, or even about him. This was about changing healthcare culture nationally, maybe even globally. The work he'd started in self-defense had become something much larger than himself. That evening, he picked Mia up from school and took her out for celebratory ice cream without explaining what they were celebrating. She didn't need to know about board meetings and funding approvals. She just needed to know her dad was happy. 2 ice creams in 1 month? Mia observed, attacking her strawberry cone. Something really good must have happened. Something really good did happen. Remember how Daddy's been working on helping other hospitals be nicer to their workers? Yeah. Well, now I get to do that as my whole job, teaching other places how to do what we did at St. Catherine's. Mia considered this, her expression serious. Does that mean you'll travel a lot? Like, away from me? The question pierced him. In his excitement about the expansion, he hadn't fully considered the practical implications for their life. Some traveling, probably. But I promise, I will never let work become more important than you. That's the whole point of everything I'm fighting for. Okay. She seemed satisfied. Can Mrs. Chen stay with me when you travel? She makes really good dumplings. Mrs. Chen can definitely stay with you. As autumn deepened into winter, the Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being took shape. They renovated a wing of the administrative building, creating office space for Daniel's growing team, a training center for workshops, and a resource library for visiting healthcare professionals. The first cohort of hospital administrators arrived in January for a 3-day intensive training on implementing family-friendly policies. Daniel found himself teaching, something he'd never imagined doing outside clinical contexts. But standing in front of 30 administrators from hospitals across the region, walking them through the principles that had transformed St. Catherine's, he discovered he had a gift for translating lived experience into actionable strategy. The key, he told them during one session, is authenticity. You can't fake caring about your staff. They'll see through it immediately. This work requires genuinely believing that the humans who work for you deserve to have full lives, not just lives in service of your institution. A hospital CEO from Michigan raised her hand. What about staff who abuse flexibility? We've had situations where nurses claim family emergencies repeatedly to get out of difficult shifts. First, examine whether the pattern is actually abuse or whether it's someone drowning who needs help. Second, address it through supportive conversation, not punishment. Ask what's happening in their life that requires so many emergencies. Maybe they need different scheduling. Maybe they're dealing with a crisis and need temporary accommodation. Maybe they're genuinely taking advantage, in which case you address it individually rather than punishing everyone with restrictive policy. Rebecca co-taught many of these sessions, bringing her administrative expertise to complement Daniel's frontline perspective. Their partnership had evolved into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. She'd become a regular presence in Daniel's life, occasionally joining him and Mia for dinner, sharing stories about her mother's progress, offering advice on navigating hospital politics. You know what I realized yesterday? Rebecca said during one of their planning meetings. 6 months ago, I didn't have any real friends, just colleagues and acquaintances. Now I have people I actually care about. You gave me that too. You gave it to yourself by being willing to change. Only because you showed me what I was missing. She pulled up a new set of data on her laptop. Speaking of which, our 6-month outcomes are remarkable. Staff retention is up 23%. Patient satisfaction has increased across all departments. We're saving approximately $1.2 million annually in recruitment and training costs alone. The financial case for this work is ironclad. The data was compelling, but Daniel found himself more moved by the stories. The oncology nurse who'd been able to be present for her father's final days. The surgical resident who'd attended his son's first soccer game. The respiratory therapist who'd finally taken the vacation she'd been postponing for 3 years. Each story represented a life made slightly more whole, a family given back precious time, a worker treated like a human being instead of a resource. Spring brought new developments. The university partnerships yielded research papers documenting the policy's impact. National nursing journals published articles about St. Catherine's transformation. Daniel received an award from the American Nurses Association for advocacy and innovation. The attention felt both validating and uncomfortable. He still thought of himself as a bedside nurse who'd gotten tired of being punished for checking on his kid. But Mia was proud. She kept the newspaper article about his award in her backpack, showing it to anyone who would look. When her class did a unit on heroes, she wrote her essay about her dad, the nurse who changed how hospitals treat their workers. Her teacher sent Daniel a copy of the essay, and he'd cried reading his daughter's words. "My daddy is a hero because he fought for what was right, even when it was scary. He showed me that being brave means doing the right thing, even when your hands are shaking." In late May, Daniel received a call from the state nursing board. They wanted to discuss adopting his policy framework as recommended best practice for all licensed healthcare facilities in the state. The conversation required careful navigation. He wasn't interested in mandates that might backfire, but he was interested in setting standards that protected workers from punitive policies. "What we're proposing," the board chair explained, "is incorporating flexibility standards into our accreditation requirements. Not dictating specific policies, but requiring facilities to demonstrate they've created space for staff to manage family responsibilities without fear of retaliation." Daniel thought about how different his life might have been if such standards had existed when Rebecca first started documenting his violations. "I think that could work, as long as it's framed as empowering staff rather than restricting hospitals." Exactly our thinking. Would you be willing to serve on the committee developing the standards? Another expansion of responsibility, another piece of his time parceled out to causes beyond his immediate control, but also another opportunity to protect people from what he'd experienced. "Yes, I'll serve." That night, tucking Mia into bed, she asked him a question that had clearly been percolating for a while. "Daddy, do you ever miss when things were simpler? When you were just a nurse and I was just your kid and we didn't have to share you with so many people?" The question hit him in the chest because, yes, sometimes he did miss the simplicity of their old life. Sometimes being, "But then I remember why things changed. They changed because I refused to choose between being your dad and being a nurse. And now other people don't have to make that choice either. That feels important." It is important. I just want to make sure you know that even when you're being important to other people, you're still most important to me. Daniel pulled her into a tight hug, overwhelmed by the wisdom and grace of this small human he'd somehow been trusted to raise. "You are the most important thing in my world, Mia. Always. Every decision I make, every path I choose, it all comes back to you. You're my why." "I know." She yawned, fighting sleep. "I just wanted to make sure you knew I know." Lying in his own bed later, staring at the ceiling, Daniel thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that 3:17 a.m. email that had made his stomach drop, through confrontation and crisis, transformation and expansion, to this moment where his small act of defiance had rippled out to touch thousands of lives. He'd stood firm when it would have been easier to apologize. He'd offered grace when he could have chosen revenge. He'd insisted on his humanity when the system demanded he be a robot. And somehow, impossibly, the world had shifted to accommodate his truth. The work wasn't finished. It would probably never be finished. But it was launched, sustainable, growing. The Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being was training its second cohort. The state nursing board was developing new standards. Hospitals across the country were reaching out for guidance. And through it all, Daniel remained grounded in the same truth that had started everything. Being a good father made him a better nurse. Loving Mia didn't diminish his professional capacity. It expanded it, deepened it, made him more capable of compassion because he knew what it meant to love someone with your whole heart. That truth had saved his career, transformed a hospital, and started a movement. Not because it was radical, but because it was profoundly, essentially human. And in the end, maybe that was the point. The most revolutionary thing you could do was refuse to stop being human, even when the system demanded it. Especially when the system demanded it. Daniel closed his eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking the constant mental chatter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new people to help, and systems to change. But tonight, he could rest in the knowledge that somewhere, A nurse was checking on their child without fear. A father was attending his daughter's wedding. A mother was visiting her elderly parent without guilt. And that made everything, every fight, every risk, every uncomfortable moment in the spotlight, entirely worth it. 6 months after the Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being opened its doors, Daniel stood in the hospital's auditorium watching St. Catherine's prepare for what Rebecca had dubbed Family Day, an event that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Staff members were bringing their children, their elderly parents, their partners to the workplace that had once demanded they pretend these people didn't exist. The transformation was visible in every detail. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling welcoming families. Activity stations dotted the space, face painting, balloon animals, a photo booth. The hospital had hired a local bakery to provide refreshments, and the smell of fresh cookies filled the air. But what struck Daniel most was the atmosphere itself, the palpable sense of celebration and inclusion that would have been impossible before. Nervous? Rebecca appeared at his elbow, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of controlled chaos. She'd thrown herself into planning this event with characteristic thoroughness, determined to make it perfect. Terrified, Daniel admitted. What if this is a disaster? What if it proves the skeptics right, that bringing family into the workplace creates problems? Then we'll address those problems and adjust. But it won't be a disaster because we're not asking people to choose anymore. We're acknowledging that they never should have had to. She checked her clipboard. Emma Morrison's family will be here. Sarah specifically requested time to speak. Are you okay with that? Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. Emma had been home for 4 months now, thriving beyond anyone's initial expectations. The Morrisons had become friends, regular presences in Daniel and Mia's life. More than okay. Emma's story is part of why this matters. The doors opened at noon and families poured in. Daniel watched nurses he'd worked with for years light up as their children ran toward them. He saw Tom Brennan from the ER with his daughter, the one whose wedding he'd almost missed, both of them beaming. Maria Rodriguez arrived with her sister and nieces, the family she'd been supporting through crisis without having to hide it anymore. And then Mia burst through the entrance, Mrs. Chen following at a more sedate pace, and Daniel's heart did what it always did when he saw his daughter, expanded to accommodate more love than seemed physically possible. "Daddy!" Mia launched herself at him, and he caught her easily, spinning her around while she shrieked with laughter. She was wearing the t-shirt she'd insisted on for today, white with bold purple letters that read, "My dad saves lives." "Hey, Bean, you ready to see where I work?" "I've seen it before. When you had to bring me that one time, remember?" "This is different. Today you get to see it celebrated instead of hidden." Mrs. Chen approached, her expression warm. "This is good, what you've done here. Very good. Children should know their parents' work, should be proud of it." The program began with Dr. Okonkwo welcoming everyone and speaking about the hospital's commitment to supporting the whole lives of its staff. Then Rebecca took the microphone, and Daniel watched her transform from the rigid supervisor he'd first met into someone capable of genuine vulnerability. 18 months ago, Rebecca began, her voice carrying across the auditorium, I believed that professionalism meant separating your personal life completely from your work. I enforced that belief ruthlessly, particularly on one nurse who refused to apologize for being a devoted father. I documented his violations, built a case for his termination, and convinced myself I was upholding standards. The room had gone silent. Mia squeezed Daniel's hand, sensing the importance of what was being said. Then my mother fell and needed me. And that same nurse, the one I'd been trying to fire, offered to cover for me without hesitation. His grace in that moment forced me to confront my own hypocrisy. I'd been demanding my staff sacrifice their families for their careers while I was slowly losing my mother to the same misguided priorities. Rebecca's voice caught slightly. What Daniel Harper taught me is that compassion isn't divisible. The capacity to care deeply about your child and the capacity to care deeply about your patients come from the same place. By punishing one, we were diminishing both. Today we celebrate a different approach, one that honors the full humanity of everyone who works here. She gestured toward Daniel. I'd like to invite our Director of Staff Wellbeing to share his perspective. Daniel stood, his pulse quickening. Public speaking still wasn't comfortable, but it had become necessary. He took the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces: nurses and their families, doctors and their children, support staff, and their loved ones, all of them part of the tapestry of care that made St. Catherine's function. My daughter Mia is 7 years old, he began, finding her face in the crowd. She waved enthusiastically. When she was 3, her mother died of cancer. Since then, it's been just the two of us. And for years, I felt like I had to hide that reality at work. Like being a single dad made me less professional, less capable, less worthy of respect. He thought about that 3:17 a.m. email, the HR meeting, the 17 documented violations. The truth is, being Mia's father makes me a better nurse. When I hold a scared child's hand in the PICU, I understand viscerally what their parents are feeling, because I know what it's like to love someone so much their pain becomes your pain. When I reassure worried families, I speak from lived experience of fear and hope and desperate prayer. Mia was watching him with those amber-green eyes so much like Sarah's, and Daniel felt his wife's presence in that moment, not as grief, but as gratitude for the life they'd built together and the legacy she'd left in their daughter. This event today isn't about being soft or lowering standards. It's about recognizing that the people who care for your loved ones when they're sick also have loved ones who need care. That the hands that start IVs and adjust ventilators and hold hands during scary moments also pack school lunches and attend parent-teacher conferences and tuck children into bed. We're not asking you to choose between being excellent healthcare workers and being present family members. We're saying you can be both, should be both, must be both. The applause started before he'd finished, building to a wave that made his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. He looked at Rebecca, who was smiling with genuine pride, at Maria, who was crying openly, at Tom Brennan with his arm around his daughter, at hundreds of staff members who no longer had to pretend they were robots instead of humans. After Daniel stepped down, Sarah Morrison took the microphone with Emma in her arms. The baby had grown substantially, her face filled out and healthy, bearing little resemblance to the fragile preemie who'd spent months in the PICU. When Emma was born at 26 weeks, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotion Daniel could see in her eyes, we were told to prepare for the worst, but we had nurses like Daniel Harper who treated our daughter like she was their own, who checked on her with the same attention to detail they brought to checking on their own children, who understood that excellent patient care and family devotion aren't opposites. They're the same thing expressed in different contexts. She shifted Emma in her arms, and the baby reached for the microphone, making everyone laugh. Emma is alive and thriving because she had caregivers who brought their whole selves to work, including their experience as parents, their capacity for love, their understanding that every baby in that unit is someone's whole world. Thank you for fighting to keep nurses like Daniel, and thank you for creating a culture where healthcare workers don't have to choose between their vocation and their families. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in controlled chaos. Children toured the facilities with appropriate supervision, learning about what their parents did. Families took photos together in workspaces that had previously been family-free zones. Mia insisted on seeing every inch of the PICU, asking Daniel a million questions about machines and procedures and how he knew what to do when babies were sick. You're really smart, Daddy, she observed, studying a ventilator with intense curiosity. Like, really, really smart. Thank you, Bean. You're pretty smart yourself. I know, but your smart saves lives. Mine just helps me ace spelling tests. Both kinds of smart matter. And who knows? Maybe someday you'll use your smart to save lives too. Around 4 p.m., as the event was winding down, Daniel found a quiet moment in the hospital's garden, a small courtyard area with benches and flower beds that staff used for breaks. He sat in the late afternoon sun, watching Mia chase butterflies among the flowers while Mrs. Chen supervised from a bench. Rebecca joined him, looking tired but satisfied. I think it went well. Better than well. You created something beautiful today. We created it. This doesn't happen without your willingness to fight back, to refuse the false choice I was forcing on you. She was quiet for a moment, watching Mia's joyful pursuit of butterflies. My mother asked again when you're coming to visit. She's becoming quite insistent. How about next week? Mia has a half day on Wednesday. We could come by in the afternoon if that works. Rebecca's smile was genuine and warm. That would be perfect. Fair warning, she'll probably interrogate Mia extensively. She's fascinated by the idea of a 7-year-old with such a brave father. Mia can handle interrogation. She's been practicing on me for years. They sat in companionable silence, watching the garden's small ecosystem go about its business. A year ago, Daniel would never have imagined sitting here with Rebecca as a friend and colleague, planning social visits with their families. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. "I got a call from the state nursing board yesterday," Rebecca said eventually. "The new standards we helped develop have been approved. Starting next year, all licensed facilities in the state will be required to have family-friendly policies in place. They're calling them the Harper Standards." Daniel's breath caught. "They're naming them after me?" "You're surprised? You started a movement, Daniel. The ripples keep spreading." The following Wednesday, Daniel and Mia drove to the assisted living facility where Rebecca's mother lived. Mia had insisted on bringing flowers from their garden, carefully selected and arranged by her own hands. She clutched the bouquet now, sitting in her booster seat, unusually quiet. "You nervous, Bean?" "A little. What if she doesn't like me?" "She's going to love you. Just be yourself." Rebecca met them in the lobby, and Mia immediately hid behind Daniel's legs, unusual behavior for his typically outgoing daughter. But when they reached her mother's apartment and the elderly woman opened the door, Mia's shyness evaporated. Margaret Cole was 83 years old, white-haired and elegant despite the walker she used for support. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as Rebecca's, lit up when she saw them. "You must be Mia. Rebecca's told me so much about you and your father. Please, come in." Mia presented the flowers with formal solemnity. "We brought these for you. I picked them myself from our garden." "They're beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart." Margaret's apartment was cozy and warm, filled with photographs and books. She settled into her favorite chair while Rebecca made tea, and Mia immediately began examining the framed pictures on the side table. "Is this Ms. Cole when she was little?" Mia asked, pointing to a photo of a young Rebecca, maybe 8 years old. "It is. She was about your age in that picture, just as serious then as she is now." "I heard that," Rebecca called from the kitchen. Over tea and cookies, Margaret asked Mia about school and friends and interests, but eventually the conversation turned more serious. "Your father is quite remarkable," Margaret told Mia. "Do you know that? He changed my daughter's life." Mia nodded seriously. "He changed lots of people's lives. That's what he does. But he changed Rebecca's in a very specific way. She was so focused on being perfect at work that she forgot to be present in her own life. She wasn't visiting me, wasn't calling, was letting our relationship wither because she thought her career was more important. And then your father showed her that caring about family doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong." Mia looked at Daniel with an expression of fierce pride. "My daddy is the strongest person I know. He works all night taking care of sick babies and then comes home and takes care of me. And he never complains even though I know he's tired." Margaret reached out and took Mia's small hand in her aged one. "You know what the most important thing your father did was? He refused to be ashamed of loving you. He said my daughter matters, and he kept saying it until the world listened. That's real courage." After they left, driving home through evening traffic, Mia was uncharacteristically thoughtful. "Daddy, did you really almost lose your job because of me?" The question landed like a punch. Daniel had tried to shield her from the worst of that stress, but she'd always been perceptive beyond her years. "Not because of you, Bean. Because of rules that didn't make sense. Rules that said loving you made me a bad nurse. But that's stupid. Loving me makes you a good everything." "Exactly. And now the rules are different because we fought to change them." "We? I didn't do anything. You did everything. You were my reason for fighting. Every time I wanted to give up or apologize or just accept their version of who I should be, I thought about you. About teaching you that work matters more than family. I couldn't live with that lesson, so I kept fighting." Mia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When I grow up, I want to fight for things that matter too, like you." "You don't have to wait until you're grown up, Mia. You can start now. Fighting for what matters just means refusing to accept things that are wrong, even when it's scary." The months that followed brought a steady rhythm of progress and consolidation. The Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being trained its 5th cohort of hospital administrators. The state's new standards were implemented with remarkably little resistance. Turns out most healthcare workers had been waiting decades for permission to be human. Research papers documenting the policy's impact were published in major journals. Daniel's team grew to include 6 full-time staff members, each bringing expertise in different areas of healthcare administration and worker advocacy. But the work that mattered most to Daniel remained the bedside care. He maintained his clinical shifts in the PICU, refusing administrative offers to transition fully into leadership. Those nights with sick children and terrified parents, those moments of crisis and comfort and careful clinical judgment, that was where he remembered why any of this mattered. One night in late autumn, nearly 2 years after that fateful HR meeting, Daniel was checking on a new admission, a premature baby girl born at 27 weeks, fighting the same battles Emma Morrison had fought. The parents were young, scared, overwhelmed by machines and medical terminology and the terrifying fragility of their daughter. "Is she going to make it?" the father asked, his voice breaking. "Everyone keeps saying things like cautiously optimistic and managing complications, but nobody will just tell us, is our baby going to live?" Daniel looked at the tiny human in the isolette, remembered Emma, remembered every baby who'd passed through this unit in his 8 years here. "I can't promise you outcomes, but I can promise you this. She's being cared for by people who see her as precious, not just as a patient, who will check on her with the same attention we give our own children, who understand that she's your whole world because we have whole worlds of our own that we love just as fiercely." The mother was crying silently. "The day nurse, Maria, I think her name was, she told us about you, about how you fought to make this hospital better for families, for staff who have families. Thank you for that. Thank you for trusting us with your daughter." Later, during the quiet 3 a.m., hours when the hospital settled into nocturnal rhythm, Daniel found himself at the same nurse's station where he'd read that email 2 years ago. The space looked the same computers, same chairs, same persistent fluorescent hum. But everything else had changed. He pulled out his phone and checked his messages. A photo from Mia's school showing her science project about butterfly metamorphosis. A text from Mrs. Chen saying she'd made extra dumplings if he wanted to pick some up tomorrow. A message from Rebecca sharing photos from her mother's 84th birthday celebration. 2 years ago, each of those messages would have been a violation. Each check of his phone would have been documented, added to the case being built against him. Now they were just life. The normal, necessary connections that sustained him through difficult shifts and made him better at everything he did. Maria found him there, lost in thought. "You okay, Danny? You've got that faraway look." "Just thinking about how different things are, how close I came to losing all of this." "But you didn't lose it. You fought back and won. And in winning, you changed things for all of us." She sat beside him, pulling up her own phone. "My sister got engaged. She's happy, healthy, building a new life, and I got to be there for her through all of it without hiding or lying or pretending I didn't have family responsibilities. That's because of you. It's just because we all refused to accept the false choice they were forcing on us. Maybe, but you went first. That takes a special kind of courage." The new admission stabilized over the following days. Her parents visited in shifts, learning the rhythms of PQ life, slowly releasing the terror that had gripped them at her birth. Daniel watched them transform from shell-shock trauma survivors into cautiously hopeful advocates for their daughter, the same journey every PICU parent made. On a Saturday morning in early December, Daniel woke to find Mia already awake and sitting on his bed, holding a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting. "I wrote something for school," she announced. "We're supposed to write about someone we admire and why. Want to hear it?" "Always." She cleared her throat dramatically. "The person I admire most is my dad, Daniel Harper. He's a nurse, which means he takes care of sick babies in the hospital. But that's not why I admire him. I admire him because when bad people tried to make him choose between his job and me, he said he wouldn't choose. He said loving me made him better at his job, not worse. And he fought until everyone believed him." Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "When my mom died, I was really little. But my dad made sure I never felt like I lost both parents. He works really hard, but he's always there when I need him. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you're scared. That's why I admire him." The end. Daniel pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed. "That's beautiful, Mia Bean. Thank you. Is it okay that I wrote about Mom dying? The teacher said we could write about hard things if we wanted." "It's more than okay. Mom would be proud of both of us, of how we've built our life together. That afternoon, they visited Sarah's grave as they did every month. The December air was crisp and cold, the cemetery peaceful under gray skies. Mia arranged fresh flowers in the holder at the base of the headstone, while Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets, having one of his one-sided conversations with his late wife. "Things are good, Sarah. Really good. Mia's thriving, smart and kind and brave just like you. The work at the hospital has grown into something bigger than I ever imagined. We've helped change policies across the state, maybe eventually the country. And it all started because I couldn't accept being punished for loving our daughter." Mia finished with the flowers and came to stand beside him. "You think Mommy knows about everything that happened?" "I think she knows, and I think she's proud." "I think so too." Mia took his hand. "Can we get hot chocolate on the way home? It's freezing out here." "Hot chocolate sounds perfect." The following week brought St. Catherine's annual holiday party, now reimagined as a family event rather than adults-only affair. The hospital's grand hall was decorated with lights and a massive tree, and staff members arrived with their children and partners, no longer needing to pretend these people didn't exist. Daniel arrived with Mia, who'd insisted on wearing her fanciest dress, a red velvet thing she'd picked out specifically for the occasion. She immediately ran off to join other staff children at the craft table, leaving Daniel to navigate the adult socializing. He found himself in conversation with Tom Brennan, who'd become something of a friend over the past year. Tom's daughter had just announced she was pregnant, making Tom an upcoming grandfather. "Never would have happened if I'd missed that wedding," Tom said, nursing a glass of punch. She told me later she'd been on the fence about the guy, but seeing me walk her down that aisle, knowing I'd fought to be there, it convinced her that family should always come first. Now I'm going to be a grandpa because you made it possible for me to be there when it mattered. "You would have found a way," Daniel protested. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have felt good about it. I would have felt guilty, like I was choosing her over my patients. The policy you created, it freed all of us from that false guilt." Rebecca appeared with her mother in a wheelchair, both of them dressed for celebration. Margaret had become a regular presence at hospital events. Her relationship with Rebecca transformed from dutiful obligation to genuine connection. "Daniel! Mia!" Margaret called out. "Come take a photo with us." They gathered around, Daniel and Mia, Rebecca and Margaret, Maria and her family, Tom and his daughter and son-in-law, Sarah and James Morrison, with Emma, now a chubby, healthy toddler, barely recognizable as the fragile preemie she'd been. The hospital's photographer captured the moment, all of them smiling, connected, whole. Later, after Mia had fallen asleep against his shoulder and the party was winding down, Dr. Okonkwo found Daniel in a quiet corner. "I wanted to give you this before the official announcement next week," she said, handing him an envelope. The board voted unanimously. Inside was a letter promoting him to Senior Vice President of Staff Well-Being and Culture, with a salary that made Daniel's eyes widen and a scope of responsibility that spanned the entire hospital system. "This is too much," he protested. "I'm just a nurse who wanted to check on his kid." "You're a leader who changed healthcare culture. The board recognizes that. The staff recognizes that. It's time you recognized it too." Dr. Okonkwo smiled. "Besides, your clinical perspective is exactly what we need in senior leadership. Too many decisions get made by people who haven't been at the bedside in decades. You keep us honest." "I'd want to maintain some clinical hours. I can't lose that connection to patient care." "Already built into the proposal. You're too valuable at the bedside to lose completely." Driving home with Mia sleeping in the back seat, Daniel thought about the impossible journey from that 3:17 a.m. email to Senior Vice President. He'd never wanted power or position. He just wanted to be a good father and a good nurse without having to choose between them. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best leaders weren't the ones seeking power, but the ones pushed into it by circumstances, the ones who led because someone had to, and they were unwilling to watch others suffer what they'd endured. New Year's Eve arrived with the quiet ceremony of a year ending and another beginning. Daniel had the night off, a rarity, but he'd specifically requested it to be with Mia. They made homemade pizza, watched movies until she could barely keep her eyes open, and counted down to midnight with sparkling cider in fancy glasses. "Make a wish, Daddy," Mia instructed as the clock struck 12. New Year's wishes are the most powerful. Daniel closed his eyes and thought about what to wish for. But looking around his living room, at Mia in her pajamas, at the photos of Sarah still scattered throughout the house, at the life they'd built together through loss and struggle and unexpected triumph, he realized he didn't need to wish for anything. He had everything that mattered. "I wish for things to keep getting better," he said finally. "For you, for me, for all the people we're helping." "That's a good wish," Mia approved. "Mine is that you stay happy. You've been sad for a long time, but this year you're happy again. I want that to keep happening." The observation pierced him. He thought he was hiding the grief, the stress, the fear of those dark months when everything felt precarious. But of course she'd seen it. Children always saw what parents tried to hide. "I promise to do my best to stay happy, Bean. That's all anyone can promise." In February, the Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being celebrated its 2-year anniversary. The event drew healthcare leaders from across the country, all of them interested in replicating St. Catherine's success. Daniel gave the keynote address, speaking to a packed auditorium about the journey from crisis to transformation. 2 years ago, he told them, I was facing termination for checking my phone to make sure my daughter was safe. Today I'm standing here as a senior vice president, speaking to you about how we revolutionized healthcare culture. The distance between those two realities seems impossible. But it happened because I refused to accept a false choice, because my supervisor had the courage to change, and because this hospital chose compassion over convenience. He paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room. Every one of you has staff members right now facing the same impossible choices I faced. Nurses hiding in bathrooms to call their elderly parents. Doctors missing their children's milestones because they're afraid to ask for schedule flexibility. Therapists and technicians and support staff pretending they don't have families because showing vulnerability feels dangerous. His voice strengthened with conviction. You have the power to change that, not through complex policies or expensive programs, but through the simple revolutionary act of treating your staff like whole human beings. Acknowledge that they have lives outside your walls. Create space for those lives. Trust them to balance professional responsibility with personal needs. And watch what happens when people are freed from the exhausting pretense that work is all they are. The standing ovation lasted longer than his speech. Afterward, dozens of people approached him, some seeking advice, others sharing their own stories, all of them hungry for the permission to be human that St. Catherine's had granted its staff. A hospital CEO from Oregon shook his hand firmly. I've been in healthcare administration for 30 years. This is the first time I've heard someone articulate what we all know, but we're afraid to say, that our people can't care for patients if they're drowning in anxiety about their own families. Thank you for giving us language and framework for change. Spring brought another milestone, Mia's 8th birthday. She wanted a party at the hospital. Specifically, she wanted to celebrate with the PICU staff who'd become like extended family. Rebecca helped organize it, coordinating with charge nurses to ensure the celebration wouldn't disrupt patient care. They gathered in the break room, nurses and doctors who'd worked alongside Daniel for years, colleagues who'd supported him through the worst and celebrated his victories. Mia presided over the event with 8-year-old dignity, cutting her cake and opening presents while the adults watched with the indulgent affection people reserve for children who'd won their hearts. "Speech!" Maria called out, and others picked up the chant. "Speech!" Mia stood on a chair, completely unself-conscious. "Thank you for coming to my birthday party, and thank you for being nice to my dad even when some people weren't nice, and thank you for taking care of all the sick babies. You're all heroes, and I love you." The simplicity and sincerity of it brought tears to more than one set of eyes. Daniel watched his daughter, brave, generous, wise beyond her years, and felt Sarah's presence so strongly it almost hurt. Their daughter, the legacy of their love, the reason everything had mattered. Later that evening, after Mia was asleep and the house was quiet, Daniel's phone rang. An unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Harper? This is Amanda Chen from Channel 7. We did that story on you and St. Catherine's 2 years ago." "I remember. I'm calling because we want to do a follow-up piece. 2 years later, where's the movement now? How has it spread?" "We've been tracking hospitals that implemented similar policies after your story aired. The numbers are remarkable. Would you be willing to participate in another interview?" Daniel thought about visibility and vulnerability, about how much he'd already exposed of his life to public scrutiny. But he also thought about every nurse still being punished for loving their families, every person who needed to see that change was possible. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it." The follow-up story aired in early summer. Amanda Chen had done extensive research, tracking the ripple effects of St. Catherine's policy changes across the healthcare landscape. 47 hospitals had implemented similar family-friendly policies. Staff retention had improved at every single one. Patient care metrics showed consistent positive trends. The financial benefits were undeniable. Reduced turnover saved millions in recruitment and training costs. But more than statistics, Amanda had gathered stories. The single mother in Seattle who'd been able to attend her son's graduation. The father in Boston who'd coached his daughter's soccer team without fear of losing his job. The daughter in Miami who'd cared for her dying father while maintaining her nursing career. Each story a variation on the same theme: healthcare workers being granted the radical permission to be human. The segment ended with Daniel and Mia in their backyard, playing catch in the golden evening light. The camera captured Mia's laughter, Daniel's smile, the easy affection between them. Amanda's voiceover played over the images. Daniel Harper didn't set out to change healthcare. He just refused to apologize for loving his daughter. Sometimes that's all revolution requires, one person standing firm in their truth until the world shifts to accommodate it. The response was overwhelming. Daniel's email filled with messages from healthcare workers across the country, from administrators seeking guidance, from patients thanking him for improving the care their loved ones received. The state nursing board reported a surge in facilities requesting support to implement family-friendly policies, wanting to meet the new standards before they became mandatory. On a warm July evening, Rebecca invited Daniel and Mia to her mother's apartment for dinner. Margaret had been cooking all day, insisting on preparing a feast for the people who'd given her daughter back to her. The meal was loud and warm and filled with laughter, the kind of family gathering that fed something deeper than hunger. After dinner, while Mia and Rebecca were doing dishes and arguing cheerfully about proper stacking technique, Margaret pulled Daniel aside. "I want to tell you something," she said, her aged hands folded in her lap. "When Rebecca first told me about you, about what she'd done, how she'd tried to fire you for being a good father, I was ashamed of the daughter I'd raised. I thought I'd failed her somehow, that she'd become so focused on achievement that she'd lost sight of what mattered." Daniel started to protest, but Margaret held up a hand. "Let me finish. I was wrong to feel that way. Rebecca became who she was because I taught her that success meant sacrifice, that getting ahead meant putting career first. I did that because I came from a generation where women had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. I taught her to be ruthless because I thought that's what survival required." Her eyes grew distant. "But you showed us both a different path. You proved that strength and compassion aren't opposites, that you can be excellent at your work while also being devoted to your family. You gave my daughter permission to be whole instead of fractured, and in doing so, you gave me back the relationship I thought I'd lost." She reached out and took Daniel's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you. For refusing to be broken by a system that tried to break you. For showing grace when you had every right to show anger. For being exactly who you are without apology." The summer passed in a blur of continued growth and consolidation. The Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being expanded again, adding satellite programs in 3 other hospitals within the system. Daniel's team grew to 12 people, each one passionate about the mission of supporting healthcare workers' whole lives. The research partnerships with universities yielded increasingly sophisticated data showing the long-term benefits of family-friendly policies. But the work that still mattered most to Daniel happened at the bedside. He maintained his clinical shifts, refusing to let administrative responsibilities pull him completely away from patient care. Those nights in the PICU, caring for the most vulnerable patients during their most critical moments, kept him grounded in the purpose behind all the policy work. One night in late August, Daniel was caring for a baby boy born at 25 weeks, even earlier than Emma Morrison had been. The parents were exhausted beyond words, having spent 6 weeks in the PICU already with months still ahead. The mother looked at Daniel with hollow eyes. "How do you do this? How do you care for these babies night after night and not break?" Daniel checked the baby's vitals, made small adjustments to the feeding tube, looked at the tiny human fighting so hard to live. I do break sometimes, but I also remember why it matters. This is someone's whole world in this isolate. You trust us with your most precious thing. That trust is sacred. It deserves our best, our whole selves, our complete attention. The day nurse said you have a daughter. How do you balance being here and being home? For a long time, I was told I couldn't balance it, that I had to choose. But I refused that choice, and it changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone here. Now we don't make our staff choose between being good nurses and good parents. We trust them to be both. The mother's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for fighting for that, for creating a place where the people caring for my son aren't torn apart by impossible choices. In September, Mia started 3rd grade. Daniel took her to school on the first day, holding her hand as they walked toward the building where bigger kids and harder homework awaited. You nervous, Bean? A little. 3rd grade is when things get serious, Daddy. We have to learn cursive and multiplication and state capitals. You'll do great. You've always done great. She stopped walking and looked up at him with those eyes that saw everything. Daddy, when you were fighting to keep your job, did you ever think about giving up? About just doing what they wanted so things would be easier? The question surprised him with its perception. Sometimes, when I was really tired or really scared, I thought about how much simpler it would be to just apologize and hide how much you mattered to me. But I couldn't do it. Why not? Because that would have been teaching you the wrong lesson. It would have said that the people in charge are always right, that standing up for yourself doesn't matter, that love should be hidden instead of celebrated. I couldn't live with you learning those things. Mia thought about this, her expression serious. So you fought for me even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That's what parents do. She hugged him tight, her backpack squishing between them. I'm going to remember that. When things are hard for me someday, I'm going to remember that you didn't give up. And I won't give up either. October brought the news that the American Hospital Association wanted to feature St. Catherine's model in their annual report as a case study in innovative staff support. They'd be sending a team to observe operations, interview staff, and document best practices for dissemination to their thousands of member hospitals. This is big, Daniel, Dr. Okonkwo told him during a planning meeting. The AHA has massive influence. If they endorse our approach, it could accelerate adoption nationwide. No pressure, Daniel joked, but the weight of responsibility was real. They'd built something meaningful, but now they had to prove it could scale and sustain. The AHA observation team spent 2 weeks at St. Catherine's, watching the policies in action, talking to staff at all levels, reviewing data and outcomes. At the end of their visit, the team leader, a veteran hospital administrator named Patricia Wright, requested a final meeting with Daniel. I came here skeptical, she admitted, sitting across from him in his office. I've seen a lot of trendy initiatives that look good on paper but fall apart in practice. But this is different. This is embedded in your culture now. It's not a program. It's how you operate. She pulled out her tablet and showed him preliminary findings. Staff satisfaction is 28% higher than national averages. Patient satisfaction is 15% higher. Turnover is 40% lower. And here's the kicker. Clinical outcomes are measurably better. Medication errors are down, patient safety incidents are down, positive care experiences are up. You've proven that supporting staff well-being directly improves patient care. Daniel felt vindication and validation in equal measure. So it works. It works spectacularly. We'll be recommending your model as best practice in our annual report, which means thousands of hospitals will be looking at how to implement similar approaches. Are you prepared for that level of attention? He thought about the journey from that 3:17 a.m. email to this moment. I don't know if anyone's ever prepared, but I'm ready to help as many people as we can reach. In November, St. Catherine's received the American Hospital Association's Innovation in Staff Support Award at their annual conference. Daniel accepted the award alongside Rebecca and Dr. Okonkwo, standing before an audience of hospital leaders from across the country. This award belongs to every nurse who's ever felt guilty for checking on their child, Daniel said, holding the gleaming trophy. To every doctor who's missed family dinners and graduations and milestones because they were afraid asking for flexibility would derail their career. To every healthcare worker who's been forced to choose between vocation and family. He paused, finding Rebecca's eyes in the audience. It also belongs to the supervisors willing to change, to admit when they're wrong, to choose compassion over convenience. Change requires courage from everyone, those demanding it and those implementing it. This award celebrates what becomes possible when we all choose to be brave. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Afterward, Daniel was surrounded by administrators wanting to implement similar programs, asking for resources and guidance and reassurance that change was possible in their context too. A hospital CEO from a rural facility in Montana approached him with tears in her eyes. "We lost our best pediatric nurse last month. She quit because we wouldn't let her adjust her schedule to care for her mother with Alzheimer's. I let that happen. I enforced policies that drove away exactly the kind of compassionate person we need. How do I fix that?" You start by acknowledging it was wrong. Then you reach out to that nurse and apologize. Maybe she comes back, maybe she doesn't. But either way, you change your policies so it doesn't happen to the next person. That's all we can do. Acknowledge harm, make amends, do better going forward. Christmas arrived with its familiar rhythms of celebration and reflection. Daniel and Mia decorated their tree together, hung stockings, made cookies shaped like snowmen and stars. On Christmas Eve, they visited Sarah's grave, as they did every year, bringing evergreen branches and telling her about all the good things that had happened. "Daddy won another award, Mommy," Mia reported to the headstone. "A really big one. And we're helping hospitals all over the country be nicer to the people who work there. Isn't that cool?" Daniel stood with his hand on his daughter's shoulder, looking at his wife's name carved into stone, and felt the bittersweet mix of grief and gratitude that defined his relationship with her memory. "We did good, Sarah," he said quietly. "Our girl is amazing, strong and kind and brave. And the work, it's changing lives. I think you'd be proud." Later, after Mia was asleep, Daniel sat by the tree lights and reflected on the impossible journey of the past 2 years. From facing termination to receiving national awards. From hiding his daughter's existence to bringing her proudly to work events. From fighting for basic respect to helping reshape healthcare culture nationwide. But more than the accolades or recognition, what mattered was the quiet everyday victories. Tom Brennan walking his daughter down the aisle. Maria supporting her sister through crisis. Nurses checking on their children without fear. Healthcare workers being granted the radical permission to be whole humans instead of fragmented professionals. That was the real revolution, not the policies or programs or prestigious awards, but the restoration of humanity to a profession that had demanded its workers sacrifice their own. His phone buzzed with a text. "Rebecca, Merry Christmas to you and Mia. Grateful for your friendship and everything you've taught me about what matters." He typed back, "Merry Christmas. Grateful for your courage to change and your partnership in this work." Another message, this one from Emma Morrison's parents with a video of their daughter, now a thriving 2-year-old, opening Christmas presents. Sarah had written, "Emma wouldn't be here without you and the compassionate care you and your team provided. Thank you for fighting to keep nurses like you in hospitals like St. Catherine's. Merry Christmas from our miracle baby." Daniel watched the video 3 times. Marveling at the transformation from fragile preemie to exuberant toddler. This was why everything mattered. Not the awards or recognition, but lives saved and families supported and futures made possible. On a quiet January morning, exactly 2 years after that first HR meeting that had nearly ended his career, Daniel stood in his office at the Center for Healthcare Worker Well-Being, looking at the wall where they'd hung photos of staff members and their families. Hundreds of faces, each one representing a person who no longer had to choose between career and compassion. Mia appeared in his doorway, having convinced Mrs. Chen to bring her by the hospital during winter break. She was wearing her "My Dad Saves Lives" shirt again, still her favorite piece of clothing. "Daddy, can I see your office?" "Of course, Bean. Come in." She explored the space with curiosity, examining the awards on the shelves, the photographs on the walls, the stacks of implementation guides destined for hospitals across the country. Then she spotted something on his desk. The original email from 2 years ago, printed and framed, a reminder of where everything started. "Is this the bad email?" she asked. "The one that almost got you fired?" "That's the one." She read it carefully, her reading skills much improved from 2 years ago. "It seems so mean. Just urgent meeting with no explanation. That must have been scary. It was terrifying. I thought I was going to lose everything, my job, our health insurance, our ability to stay in our house. I thought I'd failed you by not being able to keep everything together. But you didn't fail me. You saved me. Saved you? By showing me that standing up for what's right matters more than making people happy. By teaching me that love shouldn't be hidden or apologized for. By being brave even when you were scared. She looked up at him with Sarah's eyes. You saved me from growing up thinking I should be small to make other people comfortable. That's a big kind of saving. Daniel pulled her into a hug, overwhelmed by the wisdom packaged in this small human he'd been trusted to raise. When did you get so smart, Mia Bean? I keep telling you, I've always been smart. You're just finally listening. They stood together in his office, surrounded by evidence of change and transformation, and Daniel thought about the impossible distance they'd traveled. From that 3:17 a.m. email to this moment of peace and purpose. From being punished for loving his daughter to being celebrated for refusing to apologize for it. The journey had been terrifying and exhausting and filled with moments when giving up seemed easier than fighting on. But standing here now, with Mia in his arms and hundreds of photographs of families no longer forced to hide on the walls around them, Daniel knew every difficult moment had been worth it, because some things were worth fighting for, worth standing firm even when your hands were shaking, worth refusing to compromise even when everyone said you should. Love was worth fighting for. Family was worth fighting for. The right to be whole instead of fractured, human instead of robotic, real instead of perfect. That was worth fighting for. And in the end, when you fought for what truly mattered, sometimes the world shifted to accommodate your truth. Not because the world wanted to change, but because your refusal to break forced it to bend instead. Daniel Harper had never set out to be a revolutionary. He just wanted to be a good father and a good nurse without having to choose between them. But in standing firm on that simple truth, he'd sparked a transformation that rippled far beyond his own life. And in the quiet of his office, with his daughter's arms around him and the evidence of change surrounding them both, Daniel finally allowed himself to believe what others had been telling him for months, that being a loving father had never made him less professional. It had made him extraordinary, and that truth, once spoken and defended and lived into fully, had changed everything.